Folks, thanks for your patience. We now have a quorum, and we have caucus completed. We had 3 members to be voted in Precinct 3, and it took a bit of time there. So 1 in Precinct 1 and 1 in Precinct 8, which I'll come to in a moment. I just want to go through the upfront comments with Walpole Media TV is providing live coverage of tonight's town meeting on Comcast Channel 22 and Verizon Channel 30. Live streaming of this meeting is also available on YouTube by going to the Walpole Media channel, and you can watch the replay anytime you want by going to the website walpolemedia.tv and clicking on the on-demand button. So, as you know, my name is Dan Bruce. I am the town moderator, and welcome to the Walpole 2019 Fall Annual Town Meeting. There being a quorum of over 76 members present, we are now come to order. Does the clerk attest to the return of the warrant? I do. Yes, she does. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to introduce a group of vocalists who are going to work their way up on the stage here now from the high school's treble chorus, who are going to perform the national anthem for us. They are Caitlin McCabe, Allison Canavan, Shaylin White, Brianna McKeon, and Catherine Lightbody. Please rise. Anytime, ladies. Thank you, ladies. That was beautiful. Watch out, Todd Angeli. That's for those Bruins fans out there. So this evening, I'd first like to introduce person sitting to my left. We have Town Council Lauren Goldberg, we have Town Administrator Jim Johnson, and we have the Chair of the Board of Selectmen, Jim O'Neill. I do not see Congressman Lynch. I haven't heard from him. I'm just double checking to see if somebody's out there. Okay, so no Congressman Lynch tonight. Or other specific elected officials. So I just want to basically introduce to you all the town meeting members that I mentioned before. So in Precinct 1, we had Jennifer Jackson elected by caucus. In Precinct 3, we had a runoff, a tie vote, but I don't know that it matters in the tie. We had Jennifer Karnakis, Maureen Martin-Smith, and Robert O'Leary that have joined us from Precinct 3. And in Precinct 8, we had Susan Spenley won the tiebreaker in that precinct. So thank you, folks, and welcome to town meeting. Just a few announcements. We've had a bit of turnover in the ranks. So in the new departments, we have Dr. Bridget Goff as the Superintendent of Schools, Assistant Superintendent Bill Hahn. In Community and Economic Development, we have Ashley Kark. Human Resource Administration, Chelsea Branco. Town Engineer Carl Baldoff. Drew Hand is now the Highway Superintendent, and Justin Monta with Parks and Cemetery Superintendent. And I am trying to see if she's here, and she is, and she knows I'm looking at her, but I'm sad to say, but happy for her, that Robin Chappelle will be retiring at the end of November. Thank you for your service, Robin. And welcome to everyone else. Other thank yous, as you know, town meeting doesn't happen without the efforts of many people. The League of Women Voters who checked you in and gave you your electronic voting device, the town clerk's office, specifically Liz Gaffey to my right, and her staff, Laura Bamford, and others. The Walpole Media Corp behind the curtain. I don't know if Tamara and Pete are still here, but they did a lot of the setup work. We have Patrick and Malka during the evening. And I also get to add the Option Technology folks, Mark and Jeff behind the screen here, for providing our electronic voting. Unfortunately, it's not pro bono. Sorry, folks. And thank you to the National Honor Society members out front who have provided the refreshments and snacks, of which you'll get a chance to get to at the 9 o'clock break. I also want to thank Claire Abril and Cindy Berubri for all they do in Town Hall to prepare for this evening. And thanks again to the gentleman in the booth, Jim D'Attilio, and I think Mike Dunneman's there too, for the technical support. And I also would be remiss if not mentioning Patrick Shields as well, the Assistant Town Administrator. Let's go over some procedural rules at this time. Please note that if you're an RTM member, a town official, a member of a board or committee, you need to sit on this side of the break. I know some of the town members are up in the back, but I don't want you intermingled with I'm okay with that up there too. So I know I said the break, but that's pretty much of a regular there. If you would like to speak, please come down to the microphones located down front, and then sit in the center row and get in queue if there's a line. So, on the outside, just kind of move to the outside. I do kind of make note, so as you come down and you take seats, so I keep pretty good track of that. I'm not perfect, so please bear with me. When you are recognized to speak, please identify yourself by name and precinct, even if I call you by name, just to make sure everybody knows who you are. Address your remarks to the moderator. If you are asking a question, I will ask the appropriate official for a response. I generally like you to avoid a direct dialogue. I'll let it go a little bit sometimes when it's normal, but we want to keep it under control there. If you have facts and figures when speaking and you cite them, please reference the source. If it's a document, please have copies available for all 150 members. I will make every effort to recognize anyone wishing to speak on a first-time basis over someone who has previously spoken on an article. So if you are in line, again, please, and you notice that our individuals have come up behind you that have not spoken, if you could move or just recognize that I will bypass you to recognize them. The podium down front is only to be used by town officials, town committee members, and other ex officio members whose duties have a relevance to the motion at hand. RTM members shall speak from the microphones. When the debate on an article is complete, we will take a vote. And this is where I'm going to ask Mr. Blau from the Rules Committee to come down and brief you on the changes that the Rules Committee has debated and is proposing on electronic voting. Mr. Blau?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to thank you especially for proposing the use of electronic voting, hopefully to make our lives a little bit easier and get out of here quickly. I know The Pats are playing tonight, but I don't know if we'll be able to get out quickly enough to see the end. I'd also like to thank the administrator, Mr. Johnson, for helping to guide me through this process, and also for preparing the printouts of the proposed and recommended changes to the rules. And also, I'd like to thank the Rules Committee members for electing me their chair and allowing me to bring these recommendations to you. So to begin, I just want to make sure that everyone has a copy of the rules applying to the conduct of the town meeting. The packet was outside on the table if you don't have one. The recommended changes are highlighted in yellow. And also, does everyone have their electronic voting device? Yeah. So the reason I'm speaking to you is because after the success at greatly reducing the amount of time it took to take votes at the spring town meeting as compared to the previous town meetings, the moderator asked the Rules Committee to look into making the pilot rules used at that meeting more permanent. So the Rules Committee did meet, and I'd like to again thank those members for a very productive meeting. And now the Rules Committee proposes the changes that are shown in the packet. What the proposal does not do is change any of the procedures that you're already familiar with for using the existing voting methods. That includes the voice vote, the standing vote, the roll call vote, and the secret ballot. In particular, the recommendation is to keep voice voting as the primary method of voting to move the proceedings along. What the recommendation does do is add electronic voting as a fifth voting method as a substitute for the standing and roll call votes only if the conditions for those types of votes are already otherwise met. So, for example, if a certain number of town meeting members must stand and ask for a particular type of vote in order to have it, that condition would still be required for the electronic vote. The idea here is to leave the decision up to the moderator and give the moderator another tool by which to conduct what would otherwise be a standing or roll call vote. And the reason that the Rules Committee felt that it was good to leave the discretion with the moderator as to whether to use electronic voting is just in case there are any situations that the committee hadn't thought of where it might be useful to use the existing methods of having everyone stand or having the clerk call the roll. So what we've done in the packet is take all of the conditions for the standing vote and the roll call vote and add them into a new section 5F, and that section allows the town moderator to replace the standing or roll call vote with electronic vote. So with that, the details of the actual language are in the packet, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Well, seeing no interest, I would then place the recommendation before the body.
The proposed rule change requires a 2/3 vote. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. No, I'm sorry, there was one no. So that is a 2/3 vote. The motion carries, and it is a permanent change to the rules. I declare a 2/3 vote. Thank you, Mr. Blau. Just to go over it kind of quickly, Mr. Blau covered most of it, but I just want to go through the procedurally, the use of electronic voting. I know we have some new members. Most of you are familiar, but it's been a few months. So if I'm unable to call a voice vote, I'll use that first, but if I'm unable to call it, we'll go to an electronic vote. If the motion is requires other than a simple majority or 2/3, and it's not unanimous or not clearly unanimous, and if no less than 7 members can stand and call for an electronic vote as well. I will also conduct an electronic vote replacing the roll call vote if prior to taking any vote, a motion is made from the floor and seconded by no less than 20 members. That requires a majority vote for adoption. So when an electronic vote is to be taken, I will indicate when voting is open. The green light will go on. And just to remind members, press 1 for yes, 2 for no, 3 to abstain. Buttons may be pressed at any time during the entire 30-second, or 20 seconds, right? 20-second period. And we do have a sample question for folks to get to test their devices and just to get familiar with what it's like. So, Jeff, if you could bring up the sample question. And I'll come to you in a moment, Mr. Trudell. Okay, so all those that I believe yes, press 1, no, press 2, and 3 to abstain, and then we will show the results. You can change your vote at any time. James White's not playing tonight, just kidding. Okay, voting is now closed, and we will display the results. They will quickly tab through. While this is going through, you'd be looking to make sure your vote looks accurate. If it's inaccurate, at the end you should stand and you can challenge and we can get your vote changed. Okay, Mr. Trudell, you had a question?
Clarification. A vote on the article does not include voting to move the question with regards to the roll call vote?
I will try to call, that's a majority vote. I will actually move the question as 2/3, so I will try to call it if we...
No, but I mean, that doesn't count as a vote if somebody wants to have a roll call vote.
To move the question?
Right.
You don't do a roll call on moving the question.
No, if they wanted to make the motion to have a roll call vote, moving the question does not prohibit them from asking for that after that vote.
I'm sorry, Town Council?
Mr. Moderator, through you. When there's a motion to move the question, all debate on the article stops.
Yeah, so that would be that. Ms. Lawson?
You might want to just remind people to turn their device on.
Thank you.
I
Excellent,
did not.
excellent question. Folks, your device should be turned on. If it didn't record it, that is probably your cause. So after the voting period is closed, again, all your votes will be displayed 2 precincts at a time. In case you didn't notice, it's about 7 seconds. I'll then call for any member to stand who feels their vote was recorded in error or not voted or not recorded. So make sure your device is on. If there are any changes, we'll change it, redisplay the results, and the only time challenge are permitted is that first time through. So your results should be correct on the change, and that will be it. After this final screen with corrections, if necessary, will be displayed. The votes become final, and the voting tally will have a pass-fail indicator at that point in time. Okay, that's it on the electronic voting. If you wish to make a substitute motion and you know in advance you are going to do so, please prepare that motion in writing, have it seconded in it, and bring it down to the town clerk and I. Ensure it's signed by both parties. This allows the town clerk to keep an accurate record of the proceedings. If your motion is complex, I may ask you to table the item to allow for a proper review so not to unnecessarily delay the evening's proceedings. We may see some spirited debate over a number of issues this evening. At all times, I expect debate to remain respectful. Please limit your debate to information that will help the fellow RTM members decide how to vote on the motion immediately before them. Declare your position that you want the members to support, and explain your reasons and facts for that position. In essence, think of your right to speak balanced by the right of your fellow RTM members to listen as a whole to what is pertinent to the question under consideration. It is an honor for me to serve as moderator for the town of Walpole. I assure you that this and all town meetings will be run as efficiently and fairly as possible. As you know, I have no vote and that would influence the outcome of any particular article. Any questions or comments at this time? All right, at this point in time, we will handle the resolutions. Excuse me, Mr. O'Leary? Mr. O'Leary? You here for a motion? Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. At this time, please rise and remain standing, and I will read each resolution, then pause for a moment of silence, read the next resolution, and so on, so there's not an up, down, up, down. Resolved that we, the representative town meeting members, inscribe upon the record of the fall annual town meeting of October 21st, 2019, our recognition and sincere appreciation of the contributions rendered by the late Wallace M. Colburn, who passed away on August 24th, 2019. As a representative town meeting member from 1980 to 1981 in Precinct 2. And further, in acknowledgement of the town's loss, we request the moderator observe a moment of silence in Wallace's memory, and further, that the town clerk be instructed to send a copy of this resolution to Wallace's family. A moment of silence. Thank you. Resolved that we, the representative town meeting members, inscribe upon the record of the fall annual town meeting of October 21st, 2019, our recognition and sincere appreciation of the contributions rendered by the late Doris M. Foley, who passed away on May 30th, 2019. As a representative town meeting member from 1987 to 2001 in Precinct 4, and from 2004 through 2013 in Precinct 5. And further, in acknowledgement of the town's loss, we request the moderator observe a moment of silence in Doris's memory. And further, that the town clerk be instructed to send a copy of this resolution to Doris's family. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. Resolved that we, the representative town meeting members, inscribe upon the record of the fall annual town meeting of October 21st, 2019, our recognition and sincere appreciation of the contributions rendered by the late Ann S. Olton, who passed away on June 21st, 2019, as a representative town meeting member from 1973 to 1975 in Precinct 6. And further, in acknowledgement of the town's loss, we request the moderator observe a moment of silence in Ann's memory, and further, that the town clerk be instructed to send a copy of this resolution to Ann's family. A moment of silence. Thank you, and be seated. At this point in time, I have a preliminary motion and a second from the Finance Committee to waive the reading of the warrant. As has been the practice of the town, if it is a short article, I will read it. If it is a long article, I will not. I will refer to it on the screen. Questions or comments? There being none, the Finance Committee's motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a vote. I have another properly seconded motion that all motions of the Finance Committee be the main motion. Questions or comments? There being none, This also requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a vote. We will now proceed to Article 1, a general article that remains open throughout town meeting. In Article 1, it is moved that the town will hear and act on the report of any committee or choose any committee the town think proper and transact any other business that legally may come before the town. We have the Walpole Housing Partnership is going to give some brief remarks. Ms. Grace and Mr. Barrett? Oh, no. Curveball, huh? All right, that's great. Mr. Chekarowski.
Hi, my name is Audrey Grace. I'm the chair of the Walpole Housing Partnership. This is our fourth time presenting about the activities of the Walpole Housing Partnership. We originally submitted Articles 14 and 15 in your warrant. Those were the result of our housing production plan, which recommended several strategies to increase affordability in the town. We put some placeholder articles in the warrant, and then we worked with the community, holding listening sessions, meeting with town boards and town officials to get the language just right. And then we drafted the full bylaw text, which I emailed to all of you. Unfortunately, because of the timing of that article, the planning board was unable to hold a full public hearing on Articles 14 and 15. And as a result, it was advised that because of the defects in the notice and hearing process, that it would be better for us if we were to refer those articles back to committee so that in spring town meeting, we can get the full article text before you on the spring warrant. But just so you know, that was the Finance Committee's motion. The Housing Partnership voted and agreed upon that motion after that. But we're not done yet, and you're probably going to get even more sick of us because we're going to come back in spring town meeting. There are other recommended strategies in our housing production plan that we are going to pursue to help implement the housing production plan strategies. All that is to say, if you go on the Housing Partnership's website, on the town's website, you can see our housing production plan, which includes all those implementation strategies and the reasons behind those. You can see all of our past presentations from past town meetings, including our Finance Committee presentation, where we explain to everyone what inclusionary zoning is and what a housing trust will do. And I invite you to look at those and spend some time looking at those before the next spring town meeting. And if you have any questions, please reply to the email I sent you. And Phil?
And just a couple other words. Philip Shaharofsky, Precinct 7. Also, I am a member of the Planning Board, and I just want to reiterate the importance of us passing the inclusionary zoning at our next town meeting. Several people have been asking me, why isn't there more affordable housing in the projects that will go up in the center of town? And the answer is because we didn't already have affordable housing. And a lot of people may think that we're doing this just because we want to address the 40B issue where we have more control over 40B projects. But we're really doing it also because we have a critical need for affordable housing. 1 in 3 people, households in Walpole, are cost burdened paying more than 30% of their income, and 1 in 10 are paying more than 50% of their income on housing. So it's a critical need that not just Walpole has, but Eastern Massachusetts has. So please look for when this article comes back, because we need to address housing for our citizens in Walpole. Thank you.
Please let me know. I don't know if we could take questions now, but okay, bye.
Thank you. Okay, at this moment, we're going to cover the consent agenda. Our rules provide for the moderator to make use of a consent agenda comprised of articles which generate no apparent controversy and could be properly voted on one unit without debate. You all received a couple of emails from me, the original and then an amended version, which I sent out after the Finance Committee his final hearing on Thursday evening. So I will read the article numbers now. They're also up on the screen. If any member objects to the inclusion of any of the articles I've put in the consent agenda, that article be removed and acted upon separately in its normal course of the warrant. So, Article 8, Stabilization Fund. Article 9, Appropriation to the OPEB Fund. Article 10, Medicaid and school parking reimbursements. Article 11, Required business personal property revaluation. Hold. Who is that, please? Mary. Thank you, Mary. Sir. You would like OPEB pulled, Mr. Pia? Okay. Was that the only one, Mr. Pia? You would like 8 pulled as well? Article 14, the inclusionary zoning bylaw. Please rise, Mr. O'Leary. Yes, we are voting to accept the main motion sorry. Yep, no, good question, Mr. O'Leary, I apologize. So Article 15, establishment of an affordable housing trust. Article 16, the Hancock Court Street acceptance. And Article 18, the citizens petition for water supply extension. Okay, so we are removing Article 8, Article 9, and Article 11 at the request of the folks. So we are remaining in the consent agenda is Article 10, Article 14, Article 15, Article 16, and Article 18. Any further requests for holds? Hearing none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? There being none, it is a unanimous vote, and it is a vote. Thank you, folks. We will now proceed to Article 2 on the supplemental budget. This motion pursuant to Article 2 is as follows. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town raise and appropriate from taxation the sum of $196,560 to defray departmental and incidental expenses of the town for the fiscal year 2020, commencing July 1st, 2019, and to distribute that amount to the following budgets as follows. The town clerk miscellaneous expenses, $20,000. I am not going to read the account number. Elections, early voting, $6,560. Solid waste recycling, $55,000. Board of Health salaries, $12,000. Town engineer salaries, $28,000. Debt and interest, $75,000. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote. Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill, Board of Selectmen. Favorable action, 5-0-0. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 2? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. It is a unanimous vote. Article 3, appropriation of funds for the construction of new playing fields. I'm going to read a portion of this. I think a lot of you have it. It's pretty long. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town appropriate the sum of $6,638,252 to pay the cost of architectural design and constructing, equipping, and furnishing of new playing fields in the town of Walpole, along with any and all work associated therewith and appertinent thereto, including but not limited to demolition, site preparation, the cost of a project manager, and all other incidental and related costs, and that to meet this appropriation, the following sums shall be transferred in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 20, where the reference projects are complete and no liability remains. $168,252 from the appropriation made under Article 4 of the Fall 2000 Annual Town Meeting for the Memorial Pond Design Project, $100,000 from the appropriation made under Article 24 of the Spring 2015 Annual Town Meeting for the Police Station Project, $50,000 from the appropriation made under Article 16 of the Fall 2014 Annual Town Meeting for the Superfund Cleanup on South Street. The sum of $250,000 shall be transferred from the Board of Assessors overlay account. The sum of $200,000 shall be raised and appropriated from taxation. The sum of $1,920,000 shall be transferred from free cash, and the treasurer, with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, is authorized to borrow $3,950,000 pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 7 or 8, or any other enabling authority, and issue bonds or notes of the town thereof, and that any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the cost of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved hereunder in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of the General Laws, hereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. And further, that the Board of Selectmen is authorized to take any other action necessary and convenient to carry out this project. I'm going to continue a little bit longer. And further, that the Board of Selectmen shall be authorized to apply for and expend all funds received as gifts or state or federal grants associated with the project, and to take any other action necessary or convenient to carry out that project. The balance of this indicates that it shall be restricted to use as playing fields and similar and recreational and related recreational uses, and shall prohibit the Board of Selectmen, Sewer and Water Commissions in our town for entering into an intermunicipal or other agreement to provide sewer and water utilities from this parcel or any location beyond the borders of the town of Walpole. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted 15-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill, Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen voted 4-1-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Forsberg, Capital Budget.
Capital Budget voted favorable action 6-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 3? I know we had Mr. Salvatore for the Board of Selectmen. You had some comments. And where's...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me to speak. I was the sole no vote at the Board of Selectmen meeting, and I just make a few quick comments. First of all, the current proposal, as the last proposal that failed in the spring, contains a proposal for the turf fields. As you know, the turf fields themselves are the most expensive part of the project. And given that we are about to embark on a rather large expenditure for the middle schools and ask the voters for an override to fund that, I think instead of spending here on this project, we ought to be saving free cash and saving debt capacity for the middle schools. While I do think we purchased this property certainly for the purposes of recreation and fields, and we would get we're getting a lot of grass fields as well as the two turf fields. I believe that this is an extravagance that we can't afford at this time. Well, it shouldn't be asking the taxpayers to pony up prior to seeing what we're going to be expending for the middle schools. So I urge you to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. It'll come on, Mr. Senna.
Hello? Vic Senna, Precinct 8. I don't know if you've been giving out handouts on the way in. I don't know if everybody knows what's going on in Franklin. Franklin just had a terrible incident up there. They had turf fields, and someone did some testing on the groundwater. And the turf fields that they had has been leaching carcinogens into one of the wells up there. This has been reported in the Boston Globe, all right? And there are a number of articles online that say that the chemicals in the gum rubber, the leaves, okay, and the substrate cause cancer. Number two, the EPA has gotten involved in this, and if anybody would like a copy of this, we have more. So I would say before anybody lets their kids play on this, we have to make sure that this is safe. And from what happened up in Franklin, I would say I would be very leery of letting my kids play on this, especially at a young age. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Senna. Ms. Coletti? My apologies. When we let Ms. Coletti speak, Ben, and I'll have you come down. Apologies.
Linda Coletti, Precinct 4. I feel that at this time we need to concentrate more our efforts on building a new middle school and maybe possibly repairing some of the other schools. Because we're doing an awful lot of building in Walpole, we have 2 gigantic apartment complexes going up in Walpole Center, another 2 very large condominiums going up on East Street. We also have a very, very large apartment complex behind the League School. And we also have, in the future, we're looking at a 40B down in South Walpole. This is going to bring an awful lot of people into our town. We have no idea the impact it's going to have on the infrastructure of Walpole. Fire department, police department, ambulance, roads, stoplights, etc. I think we need to concentrate on all of that first. We need time, is what we need. Ballparks come much later, or the Route 1A fields should come much later, so that we have more time to analyze what we've got going for us at this time. So I'm asking for a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Senna. Mr. Barrett, my apologies again.
All right, so we went a little bit out of order there, which is fine. I think that getting all the information out there is the most important part. So my name is Ben Barrett, for those of you who I haven't met yet. I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen. I'm also an RTM in Precinct 7, and I'll be speaking to you tonight about this Article 3, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the board. So for those of you who are new, the usual order of business is that whoever is sponsoring the article will speak, lay out all of the information for consideration that's been addressed in your packets, and then we can move forward the discussion from there. So I appreciate folks letting their feelings be known, but we'll start first here with a discussion of what we're all talking about here tonight. So next slide, please. So the first question, and I think it was alluded to a little bit there with the first three speakers, was over the summer when we were talking about this project, and the question was, why is it going to come back? And the answer is that it's not the same project that's coming back. We had two competing interests at Springtown meeting. On one hand, we have this huge deficit in recreational space that the town has been reticent to address for dozens and dozens of years. And on the other hand, we have folks and RTMs and residents certainly that I've talked to who are concerned, and rightly so, about cost. And specifically in the Springtown meeting proposal about some of the so-called amenities and other items besides the fields that were being included. So what we endeavored to do is to take those two interests and combine them in the best possible way so that we can address what the town needs and accommodate people's concerns. And that's what we end up here with the proposal that you see, which is just a bare bones proposal. It's the fields. To be clear, there's 4 fields, 2 synthetic turf, 2 natural grass, and then the lights for those 4 fields. And the scope that was eliminated is, as you see there, the snack bar, basketball courts, playgrounds, and some of the other items that we discussed at Springtown meeting. One of the points that I won't be discussing tonight, and mainly due to time, is a rehash of all the information that is in your packets. I know that Jim Johnson and Patrick Shield and folks at the town spent a lot of time putting together the history of this project because it's been going on for a very long time. So suffice to say, almost 20 years, all the way back to the early 2000s, and then coming into the master plan, going into the field report in 2008, and up until the time when this body, town meeting, saw fit to purchase this 60 acres down on Route 1. Certainly during that time period, other options were discussed and tabled, most notably adding on to the fields at the high school in Turco Field, which was set aside, and for very good reasons, unfortunately. It was cost prohibitive. There was a lot of environmental risk to wetlands. We would have had to reallocate preserved land as part of our town forest that abuts that area. There was concerns with safety from dust and noise with the large amount of construction work that would have to be done to lower the land and also to dewater large portions. So here we have this property that's 60 acres, of which we'll be using approximately 18, that's been handed to us on a silver platter. It's relatively flat, it's relatively dry. We can build these fields in an incredibly cost-efficient manner. And we need to grab onto these opportunities when they come by as a town, particularly given the need for our infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the second question that we invariably got was, well, what is need? How do we quantify why we need these fields? What does it mean when we don't have enough space? And so I spent some time with Brendan Croak, who's the recreational director, along with Patrick and Jim. And they have this very large spreadsheet with tons of historical data of how we utilize our fields. And each slot, as I call it here, a field slot, is a period of time, an hour, where a team will utilize that field. And so that's how you track it. And there's so much data. So the challenge was, how do we distill it down so that we can talk about it at town meeting? Because just saying we need more space doesn't really do it justice. So we took the lacrosse, football, and soccer programs and took all of that information, over the fall and spring seasons and identified what was the need. We talked with the programs based on number of participants, their programmatic needs, and identified that 142 field slots per week is what's required for those. Now, obviously, we're setting aside mile-odd fields for soccer, for example. This is just the town-owned properties. What is it that they would need to have the programs that they need to run? And then looking at historical data, what does the town provide? So we have these needs. What space does the town then give them to have these programs? And the answer, based on actual facts and data, is 53 field slots per week. So if Article 3 is voted yes, that would mean that there's an additional, based on the size of these 4 fields, an additional 78 field slots per week added for a total of 131 field slots available. And so that obviously doesn't surpass the 142 we need for just these programs, but it does get close. And that's what we're trying to achieve here for a program talking about recreational space that's been neglected for dozens and dozens of years. And it's always been wait and see, and maybe we can spend money later. And yet here we are with this huge deficit. And so Nobody's saying that we should build 20 fields and have a plan for the next 30 years. We're saying we need to keep up, and we need to have an incremental approach using small to medium-sized projects, because there is over 3,600 people that utilize these fields through those programs every year. Next slide, please. A quick note about the fundraising efforts that we've had to date. We did take a lot of scope out of the project, and so there's some items such as the accessible playground that are really important, not just to the community and the town, but important to this site, and seeing that it's used and it's fit for the use intended. So we're ready for the formation of a 501c. We have volunteer board members. We have a volunteer legal team. The core fundraising group has been established. I was thrilled that we had over 30 people at our fundraising meetings on September 4th. We also met on the 26th. And through that effort and these folks coming together and really getting some positive momentum behind this for the community, we've been able to secure pledges from youth sports groups as well as individuals and corporations of over $100,000. So I just wanted to say thank you to all those folks, some of whom are RTMs, many of whom are not. That is a huge effort that's already underway. So I really look forward to hopefully seeing that through. And just to be clear again, the fundraising efforts and these funds will go towards the scope that was removed from the project. So the town won't see any of those costs. Next slide, please. So a word on safety information. We did jump the gun a little bit there, but I will talk about it briefly here. The first is really about access, and it's not a question so much of access as it is about what modern infrastructure means to Walpole. So this project on 1A would be a piece of modern infrastructure where you have correct and safe access, you have correct and safe egress onto 1A, there's sizable parking lots. It's the correct setup for how a modern field complex should be and should act. And what we have on the other hand, and I know that I've discussed this with some folks, and understandably it's probably the worst case we have in town currently, is the fields at Byrd Middle School, where the parking lot on one side of the building is full, we have people parking on the streets, we have people parking in neighborhoods, it causes congestion in the neighborhood, it's certainly unsafe for the families and the kids that are getting out of those cars. And so it really is, that's the comparison that we're looking at, a modern field complex, which I understand is the expectation of Walpole residents in 2019, versus kind of the hodgepodge of infrastructure that we currently have in place, has been in place for dozens and dozens of years, and is no longer sufficient. So certainly this new complex would be much safer overall. And I know that folks are concerned about, well, what if the kids are riding bikes to practice or walking? And as a coach, again, I can say that that is far more the exception than the rule. Parents aren't just letting their kids walk around town anymore. They're not sending their kids downtown on bikes. So while that is certainly a concern for parents and all of the coaches, that's really just part of the bigger picture that we're talking about. And then a word on the turf and the infill, which we heard a little bit about. Certainly, we're all very cognizant of the Boston Globe article where apparently they had dumped some old and used turf and infill on this site in Franklin. And rightfully so, the environmental groups are worried about the chemicals leaching out of that, just sitting there in this pile of old used rubber and other parts of the turf. And so they're going to investigate it. And hopefully they're able to resolve that in a meaningful fashion. But I think it really goes to show what we're trying to do here in Walpole, which is have a specification for construction of the project that screens the infill so that we get high quality new infill, that we replace our fields in a reasonable amount of time so we don't allow them to wear. When we do have the fields replaced, that we dispose of the materials properly, that they're not dumped in an area that can spoil wetlands and impact our water. This is something that's done every day across the country. It's something that this body actually voted for in the spring and was done in the summer at Turco Field, was to put the same turf that's in this proposal back on Turco Field. And one positive of all that, of this common aspect of the use, is that there's a lot of investigations, a lot of testing that's been done. It's very much a known quantity. And so I have two links there at the bottom of the screen, which you can't see for some reason. But as others have said, I'm more than willing to pull these up. But they're pretty thick and voluminous studies and scientific investigations of the impacts from possible chemicals and an impact on health. And the state of New York Also, the other state is New York State and Washington State, excuse me, have done these studies, and there's no link to health hazards. So again, as a parent and as a coach, it's important that we keep our ear to the ground on these items, that we know the latest and greatest investigations. We know all about these issues and hazards. But we also need to look at it with clear eyes and take the facts that are in front of us, take these scientific studies and understand that there is no link between these turf fields and health issues. Next slide, please. Well, I should add that the Weston and Sampson folks, the engineers, are here as well, so if anybody has questions for them, certainly, we can entertain it from a technical perspective. A quick note on revenue generation, and then we'll move this right along, I promise. We do have the opportunity to rent these fields to clubs and private entities. We have a couple comparisons up there. Jim Johnson had spoken with the folks over at Medway. They rent their fields for $200 an hour. Certainly, given that Four Kicks rents their fields for around $250, that's at the top end. But a lot of people had wondered, well, what is the possibility, just an order of magnitude? So I'll give you three numbers here, and I know that there was not going to be any math, particularly for the guys there in the middle. But at a $200 per hour rental for an average of 15 hours a week on any given week for 26 weeks, which is basically 7 months, you could get around $70,000 to $80,000 worth of revenue. And so I'm not looking to get into any math arguments tonight on what is and isn't possible, but that's the order of magnitude we're talking about. So it is sizable. Next slide, please. Project costs, all right. So the last couple of slides here. We have the base scope that we discussed that's listed there. We have the turf light alternates that have been included in the project. The reason they were included in the project is because the competitive bidding process yielded excellent and low bids. So we were able to incorporate the lights, which I think a lot of folks agree is a critical component of this project, and keep the cost down. So again, another great benefit that the town has the opportunity to grab here, and we really ought to take advantage of it because these are great prices for these fields. For comparison, this value at Springtown meeting was 9.6. So 9.6 million compared to 7.9, which is a reduction of about 18%. Next slide. There's three sources of financing for the project. Next slide, please. The first, as was discussed, is reappropriation of town funds, including capital appropriations, overlay previous free cash appropriations by this body in 2018, and new fiscal growth at $200,000, which basically all serves to drive down borrowing costs for the town. Next slide. So then number two is the free cash appropriation, which is for fiscal year 2019. And the list of items there is, and I wanted to put out there, is because folks had a concern, well, there's a lot of maintenance we need to do on buildings in town. There's a lot of items, particularly with schools, that require funds, and that's important. And I would agree completely. And all of these here and more in the budget, if you cared to read it, have been funded this year. And so we're not foregoing funding of critical items just to fund the fields. We're able to do both and in a reasonable fashion for the town. Next slide. And so the last slide here is just the final breakdown of financing, how we get to the 3.9 million. If people want to know, well, how do we understand how much borrowing we're going to have to do? This is literally it right here. And just three quick points that I want to make for you all on this is the 3.95 million is being done within our debt schedule, okay? So it does not raise the debt limit. It is not going to raise taxes in this fiscal year because it's done within the debt schedule without raising the limit. And because we're doing all of this work and this infrastructure work within the debt limit, it isn't impacting our ability to do other projects. And I know from talking particularly to fellow parents of young kids in town who are in the schools, they're concerned about the MSBA program and what about being able to pay for a new middle school possibly as we go through that process. This will not impact our ability to do so. In fact, borrowing on small to mid-sized infrastructure projects improves our bond rating, which then lets us borrow money on large capital projects at a lower rate. So it's a positive thing. And one more fact I'll leave you with, because there's so many facts to put out there, is that right now Walpole's ratio of debt to their budget is 4%. The average of all of the surrounding towns, and I literally mean geographically surrounding towns, I have the data, it's on the Department of Revenue website, but I'm happy to go through it with anybody, is 8%. So we're borrowing at a rate far less, half what other towns are. And that's the right way for municipalities to be borrowing for small to mid-size infrastructure projects, which is what this is. This is a small to medium-sized infrastructure project to assess and help with a well-established need that's dozens and dozens of years old. So I think fiscally, it's really the right move for the town, and it doesn't constrain us in any way. So thank you for your time. Next slide. And Mr. Moderator, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Trudell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. With regards to the borrowing, it's been brought up several times before Finance Committee in this body that where there is a mix of borrowing and funds on hand, we need to expend all the funds on hand before we borrow $1. So we will be going through basically $4 million of clearing, grading, site prep, and so forth, and even possibly getting fields in place before we have to borrow $1 on this project.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. Pila? Is he ceding his spot to you, Mr. Brown? Okay. Mr. Brown, go ahead. I just try to go in the order that people came down, Mr. Pila, that's all. Mr. Brown.
Tom Brown, Precinct 6. My questions are basically safety and location in nature. The ball fields will be located basically on the edge of town, and it's a very busy road, high traffic speeds. Just over the summer, I've witnessed a couple of accidents up there. One was just about a month ago, and it looked pretty bad. I just wanted to know what the town plans on doing about the speed control up there, or has there been a traffic study? The parking lot proposed at the fields, will they be designated as a public parking lots? So the visitors to the state prison, will they be able to use those lots?
Chief Carmichael, do you have any comments on the speed limits or anything up there? The safety aspect, not the parking lots. We'll save that for somebody else.
I obviously, I don't have any crash data right in front of me, so I couldn't tell you exactly what the crash data would show up there. You are correct. I know we've had a couple crashes up there recently, but nothing, that's out of the ordinary or that would be outweighed against any other location in town. In fact, I can speak of a lot of other places that we probably have a lot more problems as far as crashes are concerned. But one of the issues that we did have when we saw the original plans was the entrance and exit of the fields. They did change that so that we were happy with the one entrance and then also the exit. So we were pretty happy with how the plans were. Other than that, I mean, the speed limit, it is a state highway up there. Obviously, if we saw issues with speeding, we would address that. We did just recently purchase 2 speed traffic data recorders, that we could put up there and get an exact number of what the speeds are and give us kind of an estimate that we could provide data with. But other than that, I mean, I do think that it's a safe location as far as comparison to any other part of town as far as crash data. Hopefully that answers the question.
The parking lots, will they be public access? And I know, I drive by there all the time, and you see some of the visitors parking across the street at the abandoned hospital area. So is there a concern, or has there been any incidences with the parking across the street?
As far as the parking up there, you know, we have pretty frequent communication with the superintendent of the Department of Corrections, so if we had any issues like that, I could address it with the superintendent. You know, if we found, I mean, I don't know why they would do that. They seem to have pretty much adequate parking in the lot that they have now.
The people that park at the prison to visit people there, they basically consent to search of their vehicles. Do they park across the street to forego that?
Could they do that? Yes, they could. You know, and again, it would have to be something that we could come up with restrictions. You know, if you just leave it without any restrictions, it's still a public parking lot, so essentially anybody could park there. Again, we could work with the Department of Correction. They are pretty well accommodating to us when we have an issue, so we could work with the superintendent on that.
Right. Thank you very much for your answers.
Welcome.
You guys hear this? Okay, thank you. Just to follow up on that, we have conducted a traffic study up there. I'm not going to bore you with the whole entire PowerPoint, but bottom line is the site distances were adequate. They were at least 600 feet, and the conclusions drawn from it, there's adequate storage on the site for the proposed parking limits, and I can tell you, I would ask the Board of Selectmen restrict the parking up there, not to allow parking for prison visits, or, you know, this is a town facility. They have plenty of parking across the street there, and we'd restrict that. Is that fine? Do you want me to run through the traffic stuff?
No, the other question would be on the actual fields itself. Will there be time constraints on that to be opened or closed with the gates or anything? Or will it be open 24 hours a day?
Yes, we are proposing that the gates would be open and closed, similar to what we do probably with Jarvis Farm. I know that kind of has evolved, that we leave the gates open, but we do have staff close it on the weekends and everything, so we'd probably have operations. Planning board asked me, I'd say probably 7:30 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning to probably about 9:30 at night when it gets really dark in the middle of summer.
It would be basically run like Jarvis Farm?
Similar to it, yes.
My other question basically would be on the chemicals to be used up there, just because it's in relation to the Area 4 secondary recharge area. And the other one was the past summer with the huge EEE problem. I noticed that there is a lot of wetlands up there. How will they be treating that, or is that a concern?
As far as the chemicals to be used up there, what specific chemicals are you referring to? I can call upon.
Pesticides, stuff like that. Will they be using anything like that? Is it permittable? Maybe one of the Water and Sewer Commissioners could address that?
Mr. Moderator.
No, on the grass fields. I believe there's 2 grass fields.
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, through you, I believe you might be talking about the restrictions that we have on Johnson and the restrictions that we have at Jarvis. We don't have those restrictions up at that location there.
Oh, okay.
And Tripoli, Jim, any plans on Tripoli?
As far as Tripoli, we would have the same restrictions up there that we have currently in place until, I don't think Robin's lifted that for the first frost, but all fields are currently under that, so.
Will the Norfolk mosquito control be able to spray that area, drive around with the chemicals that they use?
Robin is shaking her head at me, yes, so, yes.
All right, that's the only concerns I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Peely?
Richard Peeler, Precinct 7. I want to start off by saying that I am not opposed to the development of fields here in the town of Walpole. I want to focus my questions on the overall cost, not the cost that is being presented this evening, but what is the actual cost of this project. To you, Mr. Moderator, Jim, once the fields are constructed and up and running, who is going to be maintaining these fields? What is this existing Walpole town staff, or are additional personnel going to be hired?
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Moderator, through you, Walpole Town staff will be maintaining that, and I believe I touch upon that in the handout that was distributed. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it. There probably will be a need for an additional staff to come on. Maybe one. We added one staff member this past spring. There might be a need for one more person there. There also will be some added cost as far as the lighting down there. I believe the current cost up here at the high school is about $11,000 a year. These lights will be LED lights, so we might realize some savings there, but there will be some other additional costs.
So in the proposed budget for this of call it $8 million, $7,985,000, have those costs, utility costs, personnel costs, and everything that goes along with the personnel costs, benefits, in addition to a base salary, have those numbers are not included in this $8 million. Is that correct?
Mr. Johnson?
To you, Mr. Moderator.
This document right here touches upon all of that. We tried to cover everything there, and that covers the finance. So, no, the added positions, the added expenses are not in that cost because, quite honestly, we don't need it right now while we're during construction. I expect that if this gets funded, I'll likely come back in the spring if the Finance Committee so has it and request some funding as far as the Parks Division.
What people need to understand, what the taxpayers need to understand is not what the initial cost is, but at the end of the day, what is it going to cost the taxpayers of this town? So that's one question.
Can I follow up? Could I answer that before? It's on page 6. I specified that.
What is do you mind saying what the total
yes,
cost of this is going to be?
Mr. Moderator, through you.
Yeah, hey, gentlemen, let's, there wasn't really a question, it was kind of a very specific question. I think it was more of a statement is what I read, and that's why I didn't go to him immediately, Mr. Pia. But Mr. Johnson, go ahead.
Sure. As we specified here on page 9, the expected operating cost is between $80,000 and $90,000 a year.
So that is in addition to the $8 million. To you, Mr. Moderator, for Mark Trudell, Chairman of the Finance Committee. Mark, you mentioned that $3.95 million would be borrowed, but that there is the balance of that will come from monies on hand of about $4 million. Is that correct? To you, Mr. Moderator, Jim, what is the total amount of money that was appropriated for capital projects that have not been spent?
Mr. Johnson?
I'm sorry, I'm not following you. Are you talking the total amount of money contained in Article 3 in the motion, or what specifically?
I'm just talking about how much money is there in the town that's in various accounts that were appropriated, that were passed certain articles by town meeting over the years, that the projects were closed, they were completed, and money that was left over that is sitting in various accounts. Is that the $4 million that Mr. Trudell is referring to, or is there additional monies available so that we don't have to borrow $3.95 billion?
So, Mr. Pia, let me ask you to just simplify that question to Mr. Johnson. You went on a bit. I think I understand it, but can you be a little more concise in your question, please? I just want to keep the relevance to the article at hand. That's all I'm trying to do.
The relevant, to you, Mr. Moderator, the relevance is if there's money someplace, and I'm not saying that there is or there isn't. I'm not knowledgeable about that. But if we don't have to borrow money, but that there's money sitting in various accounts that it's perhaps more than $4 million, why isn't that money being used to pay for these fields? Number two is, if there is money that was borrowed and that we are paying interest on, why isn't that money being used for this project, since it's already been appropriated, the project has been closed out, and we're paying interest on that money.
Mr. Jones.
I know exactly what Mr. Peeler is getting at. Earlier today, I provided you with a document that inventories the town's capital spending over the last year, year and a half, correct?
That's correct.
I gave that to you. There isn't some monies left over. Would you like me to go line by line as to why they have balances? I have talked to some of the department heads. Some of the projects are not closed out. Some projects, such as a generator replacement, the bids came in lower than expected, and we will likely go back to town meeting. We've done that actually 3 times since 2013. We've gone back to town meeting and reappropriated some of this money. Some of the projects, such as the $1.5 million for the MSBA study, has not been spent at all. We have $1.5 million remaining there because we actually are waiting until October 30th to officially get accepted into the program and start the process by hiring an OPM, then an architect. So yes, you are correct. There is some monies that are unspent, approximately 2.6 or so million, roughly, but 1.5 of it is made up from the MSBA study. So there are some things that aren't in, I expect fully that we'll be back here to reappropriate it. Some money, such as, which are highlighted, I think in Ben Barrett's proposal, it's about 1.3 left over from the fall town meeting from 2018. So yes, there are some projects that aren't complete, and there are some balances there.
Guys, can we pick up the delay? It's very pronounced. It seems to be more than others. I don't know if that's possible, but Mr. Pia and folks, just be patient while I try to look at that. I don't know if they can. Just keep talking, Mr. Pia. It'll kick on after mine stops. Mr. Pia, you want to just hop over here while he fixes that one? Oh, that's you that's turning them up when they come on? Oh, sorry. I thought it happened automatically. Never mind, Mr. Pia. We have to wait. We call them down. Sorry, Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Again, through you, Mr. Moderator, Jim, not to repeat myself, but offhand, do you know how much money from capital projects for all projects that go back that have been closed out, not just for 18 and 19?
Quite honestly, I don't, Ms. Murray. I don't know the total right now. I can tell you that there's $614,000 left in the new police station. There's $84,275 left in the new fire station. There's $210,179 left in the South Street Superfund cleanup. There's some older ones that are left out there, and those are the biggest ones out there. Reason being is we wanted to make sure that the projects were closed out. Honestly, I think in the plans, we'll probably be likely reappropriating some of this money, maybe towards a parking lot in the back of the fire station to improve the central business district, but that's just kind of off the top of my head.
To you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moderator, again, Jim. Memorial Pond, when we approved that project, I noticed that in the sheet that was distributed, that it said that the Memorial Pond project is complete. But that is only my understanding is that it's only 50% of the scope of the work. Is that true or not true?
Ms. Lawson, just state your point of order. I'm going to allow Mr. Pia a little latitude here because it does speak of taking funds from the Memorial Pond project, although it does say it's complete. So I'm going to kind of limit it to that level, Mr. Pia. Mr. Johnson, you want to speak to the Memorial Ponds 2000 Ponds project? Is that closed and those funds are available?
The Memorial Pond project, the appropriation from just about 2 years ago for about $1 million, yes, that is complete. And we were able to get about probably the whole full scope of work. We had 2 phases. We did about 2/3 of that or so. The money that I think you might be talking about, which is in the motion, is $168,000 left over from a borrowing from the year 2000. We were hopeful that we could actually use that 168 to help offset the cost to get almost the whole amount done. Bond counsel came back to us and directed us that you can't do that. You need to go back to town meeting to reappropriate those funds. After going back and forth with our finance department a little bit, Marilyn, our finance director, and Jody, our town accountant, convinced me that we legally couldn't do it. This is the right thing to do, bring it back to this body. But I can tell you that the money that was appropriated, there's $21,863 remaining in that account, and that's from an appropriation of about $1 million. Thank you, Lauren. Sorry.
To you, Mr. Moderator, to some in the audience, to my fellow RTMs, may think that I'm going off on a tangent. As I said before, what I'm trying to do is establish whether or not there are monies in various accounts that would minimize the amount of money that the town, that the taxpayers have to, that the town has to borrow and the taxpayers are going to be responsible for. So I ask the indulgence of my fellow RTMs. I don't think I'm offline on these questions. There is a reason for it because, as I said earlier, I'm not against the fields, but if there is a way of producing those fields and minimizing the exposure to the taxpayers of this town, that is our fiduciary responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Pia.
I'm not through yet, Mr. Moderator, if I may.
Oh, I thought you were summing up what you were doing.
No, I was
okay.
just,
Excuse me, folks. Do I have a point of order? If you do, please rise. Otherwise, please be quiet. Yes, sir. So first, let me remind folks, it was not my time limit, it was your time limit. I merely proposed it, and you agreed to it. When we moved to electronic voting, I did not bring that forward again because I wanted to see how electronic voting did with the overall time limit. So if you, this body, would like to see speaking time limits come back, you can make a motion, and it actually can be brought forward for a specific article, but only going forward, not imposed on Mr. Pia at this point in time. So if somebody would like to make that motion afterwards, you may. We're going to be going on break probably after Mr. Pia finishes his comments. So I'd be happy to basically let anybody know what the order of that motion would be. Mr. Pia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I'll try and speed this up very quickly. The infrastructure that's being put in, we know that the pool, the snack facility, some of the other, the playground, those are not part of the scope of work as being proposed. But the infrastructure, I believe, is going to be put in. To you, Mr. Moderator, Jim, can you assure the taxpayers that they're not going to be asked to fund those items that were in the spring option? They are not in the fall option, and that if those facilities, those amenities are added to the fields, that the funding of those will come from fundraising that Mr. Barrett talked about.
Mr. Johnson.
I can tell you, Mr. Moderator, through you, the money that is there will be a sewer line put in, a dedicated water line if necessary. So that infrastructure will be laid. It makes more sense to do that before the parking lot goes down, before the fields go down. But as far as the fundraising efforts go, as far as they get, great. I hope they have as good luck as they have had it here at Turco Field. But I don't anticipate coming back to this body and asking for funds for a shed which houses bathrooms or anything, so unless the Board of Selectmen directs me to do so.
Here's my very last question regarding
Mr.
this.
Barrett, you may come down and answer the question.
Just as part of the answer to that last question, Mr. Pia, and the fundraising that we've undertaken and the discussions that the Board of Selectmen have had on this subject, we're bringing it back for the reason of solely to meet these needs that you described that you are in favor of for ameliorating this huge disconnect we have in the space we have. It has nothing to do with those amenities. It has nothing to do with any of these other options. So to the extent that we are getting involved in the fundraising, we do have pledges over $100,000. That's all in place, just as I said. So there's really nothing else to say to that. Thank you.
To you, Mr. Moderator, my very last question on this subject, anyway.
Excuse me, could you please rise and state your name and precinct? Thank Ms. Loris, I have your point. Thank you, your point of order. Mr. Pila, any further questions or comments?
Yes, the codicil, is that going to remain in place, the water and sewer codicil, is that going to remain in place for this particular facility?
Mr. Barrett?
Go ahead, Jim.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Johnson.
I didn't understand what water and sewer.
He's asking if the water and sewer, actually part of the motion, I believe. The prohibition, is that what you're speaking to?
Yes.
Yes, it's part of the article, part of the motion.
Okay.
I kind of read over it. I didn't read it verbatim, but it's part of the article.
Okay.
Motion, excuse me.
All right.
I'm sorry, obviously if it's in the motion, that's going to remain.
Right, okay. You answered all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pia. It is, before we take a break, I'm actually going to go back and speak to, was it Mr. Coyne? Mr. Coyne's comment. So our own rules allow for a limitation on speakers and the amount of time. And I will say, through my own timing, the primary spokesperson and Mr. Pia himself actually combined went on for over 35 minutes. I realize that's a long time. We can limit debate, and you can vote on it on a majority vote. It's in our own rules. There's a specific motion that can be made to limit or extend debate on an article that can be brought forth by any member. You can limit it by person. You can limit it for the total debate. So the motion can be made, and I will entertain a motion from anyone on the floor after a 10-minute break. You may take a break now, and we'll resume at 9:05. Thank you. Folks, please return to your seat. We're going to resume right now. For those of you who have missed the highlight during the break there, those of you who voted if someone other than Troy Edelman would catch a touchdown pass, then you were correct. Those of you who voted only Edelman were incorrect. So Mr. Dorsett has caught a touchdown pass from Mr. Brady this evening. All right. Mr. Buckley, please take your seat. Thank you, sir. We are going to pick it up. And we're going to go here to Ms. Barrows, please.
Liz Barrows, Precinct 1. I just wanted to say I am in favor of the Fields project and this article. I just had one question. I don't know who, Mr. Moderator, who the person I should ask this question to.
You should ask the question. That's a good point. From now on, folks, you direct the questions to me. Do not pick who you want the question to go to. I will work who that question should go to. I think that might help a little bit with timing if we can kind of take a little of the back and forth out. But go ahead, Ms.
Okay.
Barrows.
In one of the emails I received or in the packet, there was a section on user fees. and it says currently a user fee is charged on a per athlete basis. So, example, my daughter plays soccer, she signs up for the season, she plays, what, my phone? Okay. She pays X number of dollars to play for the season. Now, that was based upon a certain number of hours on the field during the season. If now they're anticipating for each sport, you know, the hours to double, are they expecting the user fee per student athlete to double? I mean, it just said that they expect the recreation director to reassess fees for student athletes. So my concern is that we are going to create these beautiful fields for kids to play, but now they're going to be priced out of playing on them.
Right now, the leagues negotiate with the Park and Rec to establish those per participant fees. The ones that were posted on the display were for outside rentals for like independent soccer leagues and so forth, and those numbers came from what other communities were charging. We have not yet set those rates, but they would be for independent leagues, not for our own town leagues.
But can you comment, Mr. Moderator, through you, on our in-town leagues?
Once again, that's the leagues themselves would negotiate with Park and Rec as to how much it's going to be per person. I don't know if they've opened up new negotiations based on if the fields go forward. But Jim, did you want to add more, sir?
I was actually going to go to Mr. Barrett. Mr. Barrett, do you have anything to add on this?
No, I would defer to
Mr. Johnson?
Sure. Just to touch upon that a little bit, I know Joe Grant, he's the chairman of the rec committee. They've already started talking with the user groups on this. I think if some of the user groups, I mean, they already have $60,000 plus in pledges from these various user groups. If they're able to raise a significant amount of funds like the Turco group did here for the field, we wouldn't go back right away and hit them up for fees. I mean, you know, you give us a few $100,000 and we're going to tack $25 on per kid. I think if they did anything, it'd be incremental, very small, probably $5 or $10 a head. And we also work with the school department to figure out if the high school athletes are using that field, how to hit that appropriately. But I don't think we'd look to do anything that's would really cripple Walpole families for sure.
Thank you, Ms. Barrows. Ms. Higian?
Megan Ahigian, Precinct 1 and FinCom, and I would like to make a motion to reinstate time limits of 5 minutes for a main presenter and 4 minutes for a RTM commenter.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Chandler. Ms. Sullivan, thank you. Folks, this just requires a second. It is not debatable. It's not amendable. It requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor of limiting debate to 5 minutes for a primary spokesperson and 3 minutes for anyone else from this point forward, please. She said four for primary? 5 and 4. No, 5 and 4 is okay. I'm sorry, I missed that. So 5 minutes for a primary and 4 minutes for any subsequent speaker from this point forward. All those in favor, please say aye. Sir, please state your name and your point of order. It will be for the remainder of the meeting. You're welcome. Mr. Pia, did you have a point of order as well?
Yes, I did, Mr. Moderator. I know it's in the town charter, but the opposition to an article is entitled to the same amount of time as the proponent of the article, per the charter.
So this is not debatable or amendable, but what I'm going to point out is Mr. Pia and I believe previously the rules we had in prior meetings, I haven't looked back, was 5 and 5 for the first opponent. So 5 for primary, 5 for the first opponent, and 4 thereafter. So I'm going to make that change myself because I do agree with what Mr. Pia is saying. So that is what we're going to vote on. Ms. Lawson, point of order? Well, we're already past that on this particular case. It would apply on subsequent articles. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Let's go to an electronic vote, folks. 5, and 4. 5 for the primary, 5 for the first opponent, 4 for afterwards. Yep. Folks, remember when the green light goes on, press 1 for yes, 2 for no, and 3 to abstain. You should be voting, folks. 1 for, this is for the motion to limit debate to 5 minutes for the primary, 5 minutes for the first opponent, and then 4 minutes thereafter. There's no countdown, Jeff. Okay, why would vote? Okay. There's nothing on the screen. Yeah, folks, we're going to redo that because it wasn't showing on the screen. I apologize. So we're going to start the 20 seconds again. Ready? Open the voting, please. He'll get it. He's trying to coordinate the two pieces. There you go. Nope, wait a minute. It was a Higgian and secondly by Chandler. Okay, folks, voting is now closed. It has passed, so we will use time limits from this point going forward. So for the remainder of this article, the speakers will have 4 minutes. So I declare 2/3 votes on the motion to limit debate for the balance of the meeting. So we are now to Mr. O'Leary. You realize that you will be moved to the very end, and that's your time. Okay, Mr. Damish.
Robert Damish, Precinct 7. Some of you may have seen me handing out the Boston Globe article on the way in tonight. I have to admit, last spring I did vote for the replacement Turkle Field, but that Boston Globe article did created an awareness with me, so it really opened my eyes. And I did a lot of research, and what I found was really eye-opening. So I'm not really hearing a whole lot about people saying, oh, we're concerned about the turf. You know, there's some talk about leakage into the water out in Franklin. But there is a problem with people playing on this. The EPA has come out in July of this summer, and they did come out and say that there are at least 5 known carcinogens in these products. And I also did find that there's at least 260 young athletes across the country who have come down with cancer from playing on these fields. And the most common is the goalkeeper.
Excuse me. Point of order, Ms. Lawson. I think Mr. Damish passed out something to support what he's saying. Mr. Damish?
Well, yeah, there was a Boston Globe article, and then I did some other research online with a couple websites, like the EPA and The Intercept.
Do you have the facts that support that available for everybody?
No, I do not. Only what's in the Boston Globe
Okay,
article.
folks, as we've pointed out before, if you are citing specific facts, you need to have handouts available to everybody. I'm going to enforce that this time. We've been over this multiple times. You have to have handouts to support your facts, okay? Continue, Mr. Damish.
Okay, then I won't refer to any facts. I'll just say what I read was online is it is causing cancer, and people are very concerned that if you should not just plow ahead with building these fields because nobody knows the long-term impact. I mean, just think of what happened at 9/11, first responders. Here we are 18 years later, we're literally watching people die in front of Congress. Same thing with Vietnam, Agent Orange. People went and fought for their country. 20, 30 years later, they're dying in VA homes. So nobody knows the long-term impact of these fields. My concern is someone's kid, or a number of children are going to play on these things. They'll be in college, they'll be older, and guess what? They're going to come down with some cancer-related illness. So I vote no for that reason alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Damish. Mr. Flowers.
Hi, everyone. Andrew Flowers, Precinct 4, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee. This is a lot to digest, and we've debated these issues over and over again. 80+% of us were here in the spring when we had a long debate. So let me just, in my 2 or 3 minutes here, distill what I think are the 4 main questions. Is there a need for athletic fields? Number 1. Number 2, can we afford it? Number 3, is this the right location? And number 4, is it safe? So number 1, I'm not going to belabor this. It's pretty obvious, and honestly, no one really debates it. Just look at one statistic from Selectman Barrett's presentation, the boys and girls lacrosse. For them, the total hours per week that they'd like slots is more than 3 times what they currently get. There's clear need. There's been a need since the 2008 athletic field study, and when we purchased this land in 2013. So that's pretty clear. Second, can we afford it? Again, to reiterate a point actually to emphasize a point, Selectman Barrett said, we, through our debt schedule, are going to be able to absorb over 40% of the cost of this project. So if you include the interest cost, and the total project is worth $5.3 million, over the next 15 years, through the cost of the project, the amount of debt we roll off is about $2.3 million, about over 40% of the cost of this project. So like any prudent company, we're making investments in capital investments for our long-term future, for the amenities that this town needs, like this critical need for athletic fields. Third point, is the location right? A lot of people have discussed in the spring and tonight about the high school. And again, on page 7 of the handout about the athletic fields, there's a long discussion of how the high school is one proposed option, but it would require something like 278 trucks of excavation every day. 278 trips of trucks to excavate and build out back here towards Turco. So that option was not considered way back in the early 2000s. And furthermore, for the athletic fields that we're considering tonight, it's not just for the high school students, right? This is really a gathering place for the whole community. This is really targeted towards the younger set of kids, Walpole youth soccer, the middle school age kids and lower. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have it down on Route 1A, not to kind of increase congestion around the high school. So location-wise, this has been vetted. It's been bought, the land back in 2013, so I think it makes a lot of sense. And finally, I'll end on, is it safe? So I'm not a environmental scientist or a doctor, but just kind of taking all these arguments instead tonight, let's look at the cited research from the state of Washington on the cancer-causing effects, supposedly, of these artificial turfs. The state of Washington, a very green kind of health-conscious state, commissioned a statewide study on this and found that there was no link to cancer. The Franklin, so this is cited, by the way, in the presentation
Please, Mr. Brown, your point of order.
It's cited in Selectman Barrett's presentation. It's on the footnote that he said, hey, here's a footnote in this presentation, and you can link to it. The state of Washington has done this study. So I'm just citing the presentation. So the point here is there was a Boston Globe story about a Franklin incident that when you consider the context, see, there's the study right there, the second link, the Department of Health in the state of Washington.
30 seconds, Mr. Flowers.
So I'll end by saying this. This is a gathering place for the community. It's meeting a critical need for particularly youth sports. It has a valid location. The health concerns can be addressed working with Weston and Sampson, and the cost is entirely reasonable and within the scope of the town's debt schedule. So thank you. Please vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Mr. Hamilton, you're next. Before Mr. Hamilton speaks, I neglected to say after the break, one of our National Honor Society students, when she was carrying the water supplies for the meeting, Michaela Prito, lost her cell phone in either the parking lot from here to the out front. So if you happen to find a cell phone on your way out, please return it to the school's office, or you could bring it to the town clerk's office. There you go. Or you could send her an email and let me know you have it, and I'll call her mom for you, okay? Wait a minute, somebody point, Mr. Chief?
We found it earlier, it's Mr. Imbush's.
There you go, it's already, Mr. Imbush, you have it now? I have her mother's number if you would like it. She said, call my mom. You're all set, thank you. All's well that ends well. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I put in a Freedom of Information request to the Correction Department for the number of lockdowns in the last 10 years at the prison facilities close to the fields. They have not responded. But I can attest to the fact, and I have witnesses here with me, that they do have many lockdowns. And before you start counting your rental fees, you better consider being a lockdown in the middle of a sporting event, and you got to evacuate that field. But beside that, I'm shocked at the lack of concern for the kids that are going to be playing on these fields. I am a cancer victim, and I was told that Agent Orange was safe, and it is not safe, and we know that now. Zantex said that they have carcinogenic chemicals in their product, and they came right off the shelf. There was no question whatsoever. Roundup, right off the shelf. We don't want to take a chance with the possibility of young children getting cancer, as Mr. Damisch was about to explain in detail. He knows from the research that he did that goalies were the most susceptible. I've talked to soccer players and they've told me the same thing. This is becoming a big concern. We're going to spend a fortune for these fields, and we're not going to be able to use them for many reasons. One, the prison will have troubles with them, and we will have health issues that will probably shut them down. So I stand opposed to these fields because we don't know what we're talking about when we say they're safe. Mr. Flowers, I don't know where he got his research. He didn't bring it.
Excuse me, Mr. Hamilton. The prior speaker. Folks, let's not be calling people out by names. The prior speaker. Let's remember our decorum. Mr. Hamilton, continue.
Well, I was offended by what he said as a cancer victim. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. No, Mr. Chekarowski.
Philip Shaharofsky, Precinct 7. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I just have a couple of questions in regard to the lighting. So on the field, will there be standalone lights where they're using solar panels that are right on the light itself as opposed to being wired into the grid?
Mr. Barrett?
Through you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Barrett?
I'm not sure, Jim.
Mr. Johnson?
I believe that's the case. That wasn't designed that way, and I'm looking back to our design team, and they're shaking their head no, so.
So I just want to offer, and I want to first thank town meeting, at our spring town meeting passed the 100% renewable energy goal for the town. And one of the other things that we had in the resolution was that the town of Walpole would consider all municipal decisions in light of whether they would bring the town and its residents, businesses, and institutions closer to the 100% goal. And I just want to encourage in this project and any other project to look at it as an opportunity that there may be options here to do something even more renewable. And one of those options could be to put solar panels on the poles. That avoids having to do a lot of wiring, a lot of conduit. Now, it may or may not be practical, but I do want to just urge that our, the technical team, the engineering team, that be given consideration. And sometimes these things may not be in practice right now, but actually, if you look on the web, you see that there are a lot of places where they're doing this, and it should be a possibility, or it could be a possibility. So I just urge, the town administration and again the design team to look at these options. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chekarowski. Mr. Hodges.
George Hodges, Precinct 1. I have a question through you, Mr. Moderator. I was just wondering, let me make a statement before I get to the question, if that's okay. I've had a lot of people call me for this, and a lot of people call me against it. And since it's going to be funded by the taxpayers basically at some point, wouldn't it be fair to have it on a public ballot that they can actually vote on?
Is that a statement or is that a question?
It's both. I'd like to know if that's possible.
There is a town council. There is a process for adding a question to the ballot, is there not?
In accordance with state law, the only time a question can appear on the ballot is when there's actually a statute that authorizes it or a charter provision. The ability to borrow outside of the levy limit, subject to a debt exclusion, is a possibility. But the other factor is that there can be a non-binding question placed on an annual town election ballot only. There's a petition process, and the selectmen also have the ability to do that on their own initiative. And the chapter is General Laws, Chapter 53, Section 18A.
Thank you, Town Council. Mr. Hodges?
Thank you. That answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Mr. Brusades?
Good evening, Harry Brusades, Precinct 8. My first question through you, Mr. Moderator, probably to Selectman Barrett. Could you just give me a little bit more information regarding the walking paths and the nature trails? Is that available to the general public at all times?
Mr. Barrett?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's open with the rest of the facilities. So if the facility's open, those are open. Jim, you have anything to add to that?
Mr. Johnson, anything to add?
Correct, and it's highlighted on page 11 of the handout too. The walking trails are there.
So what are the actual times that the fields are open?
That was asked and answered a little earlier, Mr. Brusades. Mr. Johnson, can you quickly summarize that again?
I believe I said about approximately 7:30 in the morning, probably in the summers, to maybe 9:30. That hasn't been set yet. I would work with the Board of Selectmen and Recreation Committee to set those, but
That's Monday through Friday?
likely on the weekends also.
All right, so Monday, so basically every day around 7:30, the gate will be open and then closing at 9:30. So it will be available for the general public. That's my question.
Mr. Moderator, through you, yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Selectman Barrett mentioned town-wide expectations. What were you referring to there?
Mr. Brusades, the questions come to me.
you.
I'll redirect them. I understand where you're going. I have a kind of note. We could just do that from now on, folks. I want to really stop that direction. But, Mr. Barrett,
Yeah, what specifically you're talking about, the town?
You had mentioned that this project is going to or be accepted, or, you know, it's being done because of a townwide expectation of this to be done. I mean, what numbers are you basing on that? The general public has not voted on this.
I can't recall exactly what you were talking about, but I believe it's when I was making the comparison of our current field situation, such as Bird, and what a new modern facility would look like, and what a tax-paying resident would expect to get for what they're paying, and that would be that would really be set forth in this new project, where you're getting what you pay for. We have modern amenities that are befitting a town in 2019 versus the current situation we have at Bird Middle School.
Okay. Well, as most of the RTMs here, we have all reached out to our population and our voting residents and asked what their feedback would be. My results definitely show that it's more like a 70% no and a 30% yes from the feedback that I've gotten. But before I even go to that point, my biggest point here is we had this vote at the last town meeting. It was shot down. It was brought back up, and it was shot down again. I do want more fields in this town, but I did ask for proper negotiations. You guys presented...
30 seconds, Mr. Mercedes.
You guys presented a scaled-back version, and I said, air quotes, scaled back minus 18%. It should be more close to $3 to $4 million. I think we should come back in the spring with a new proposal with no AstroTurf, just grass fields, which will address our safety concerns, and then we can slowly but surely move forward on the fields that are needed. Thank you very much. I urge you to vote no right now.
Thank you, Mr. Mercedes. Mr. Moraski.
Whoops. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Moraski, Precinct 8. I just have a question about Mr. Johnson's October 4th, 2019 memo to town meeting members. You indicate that the contingency budget for the September 2019 article is $843,079. Can you tell us how you got that number? You're saying it's 10.5%.
Mr. Johnson?
There's a typo there. It's more like 11.5 or 11.8%. I apologize for that.
You're at 11.
Excuse me, Mr. O'Neill, did you have some comments on this?
I'd like to make a comment when it's appropriate, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Moraski, continue. I apologize.
Thank you. So I have it as 10.5% is $749,910. So you've included an extra $100,000 in the contingency. Mr. Moderator, can we reduce the debt, the amount of sum for debt from $3.95 million to approximately $3.85 million? Because we're basically saving almost $100,000 in debt, or could be used for debt.
Mr. Barrett?
To clarify a little bit on what Jim said, it's actually my typo. So if you're familiar with Excel, and we can go into detail, when you copy over the cell that says contingency, and it said 10.5, and it got copied to the new one, so it also says 10.5. That's literally what happened. So all the numbers, all the values are accurate. They're all the same as what went before FinCom, what's been posted online, what we pushed out through social media. It's all the same. It's just that notation of 10.5% that's incorrect.
The amount, $7,985,079.
Mr. Barrett, is that the total?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well,
it's a typo. So all, as I said, all the values are correct. And as Jim alluded to, it's 11.5% or thereabouts. So it's,
okay, so I understand that some type of a clerical error has been made. All I want to do is correct it.
No, but the numbers are correct, sir. The numbers are correct. So if you want to
Joe,
correct
oh,
it-
so you're saying you want an 11.8% contingency? Is that what you're
I'm
saying?
repeating what Jim Johnson just said 3 minutes ago, that the numbers are correct, that's what was put in there.
Mr. Johnson, could you just restate that?
So, Joe, what you just said is correct, yes. What is proposed as part of this budget is approximately an 11.5, 11.8% contingency.
Okay, well, how was that contingency determined? Because usually, it appears to me that there is, usually, what I've learned over time is that in order to come up with a contingency, you really determine what your risks are. So that could be any unforeseen field condition, and then you make a judgment as to how much that is. What I don't see that being done here, or at least not aware of it. It appears that you just have some arbitrary number. Is that an arbitrary number, or have you developed some type of risk sheet that allowed you to conclude that 11.8% should be the contingency? Because I've never seen a contingency that is that high, especially, Mr. Moderator, for a fields project where you're not building a building, you're just sort of moving dirt for the most part.
Mr. Muraski, your time's expired. Mr. Johnson, please respond.
Your question was, how was it determined? It was determined by, I presented the budget to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen agreed to the budget. They voted on it. Am I comfortable with an 11.85% contingency? Yes. I honestly, what if we get into something up there? We had a considerable amount of contingency for the South Street Superfund cleanups right there, and that was much more than 10%, I can tell you that. I don't know the exact percentages off the top of my head.
Right. Mr. Moderator, can I have one more clarifying
That's
question?
up to the body, Mr. Muraski. Mr. Muraski, have one more question? Oh, wow. Mr. Muraski, I heard more yeses than nos. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can let's say you are able to build this field for the amount so specified, but you never touch the contingency. Can you use the contingency then for snack shacks, storage areas, splash pad, basketball courts, playgrounds?
Joe, I think we get it. I'm going to cut you off right there. Jim
That's
answered
all
the
I wanna
question.
know.
Thank you, Mr. Muraski.
Town council is reminding me we can only use it for which the purpose it was appropriated. That being said, I'm sure that when Maryland goes out to borrow for this, we won't borrow the full amount all at once. We may only borrow 3.75 million or something like that. And then if we need to make up the 250, she has the authorization to go out and borrow that. So I don't know if that answers your question, Joe, but the intent here is we don't generally borrow for the whole thing up front.
Well,
Thank you,
it's
Mr.
still at a
Muraski.
risk.
Mr. Trudell, you have something to add to that?
I think the clarification is that the scope of the article is 4 fields and lights. That is the scope, and the remainder of the site work would be enclosing the site with fence and establishing access through gravel driveways and parking spaces. That is the scope. They cannot use contingency to add new work that's beyond that scope.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Ms. Corey.
Hi, thanks. My name is Val Corey, Precinct 2. And I don't support the footfield, but not because of the reasons many of you maybe think. But I'm really concerned about the toxicity of the turf that everyone's been speaking about. And I saw the Boston Globe article myself. But more than that, my girlfriend lives in Franklin with her family, as well as another friend of mine with her family. And it's really not good. It's not a good thing. People there are really nervous. Well, there's a lot going on there, as you could imagine, but it's not anything that I would think anyone would worth risking for anyone in our community, never mind kids, but for anyone just to have a turf field. Doesn't make any sense to me why that wouldn't even be considered, and I imagine maybe when the board voted on it, the select board or the finance committee, maybe they weren't aware of things that are brought out later. And that's, we maybe live and learn from our mistakes or the mistakes of other people. And I think that alone, if nothing else, should make everyone pause and let everyone else, at least in the town, and that's why I agree with maybe that ballot referendum or however you say you have to do it, because I don't have kids playing on fields anymore. So it's not for me. I would say no, even if I don't. I don't think it's fair for this small body of 27,000 people, or however many we have in Walpole, I don't know exactly, to make such a decision without getting it out there to the public and letting them know. And people don't necessarily see it on Facebook, and people don't necessarily log on to the Walpole website to read it, and people don't necessarily understand, something that's 10 pages and they don't feel like getting into it. I think it should be made quite clear, and I think it should be reevaluated just simply for that reason, and go to the 4 grass fields or whatever you call them. But that's something that's a problem for me. And I also live in a development, by the way, where I could name a dozen of women right now that have breast cancer, and dozens of other people in that 90-home development that have cancer, of which I am one. And they say, cancer's in the water, cancer's in the air, toxins, that's what they say. And you know what? Why take the risk for some fields? It just doesn't make sense. Stop, think, let other people make the decision. And I think that that's what should be done, and that's why I'm voting no, not because of the 8 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. Mr. O'Neill?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and through you, Jim O'Neill. I'm a town meeting representative from Precinct 8. I'm also chair of the Board of Selectmen. And this is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. I wanted to make sure that my friend and colleague Ben doesn't shoulder all the weight here, and that I offer some support and my voice to this discussion. So at our last town meeting sent a pretty loud and clear message. They liked the idea of the fields. They didn't like the scope of the project. The Board of Selectmen worked very hard, and I'll credit both Ben and Nancy McKenzie for really leading the charge on this, and some outstanding work that they did to make sure that we thought about this project in a way that we considered would be more palatable to this body. We reduced the price. We certainly cut way back on the borrowing. We reduced the scope. And what we've got here is a really good proposal that balances the cost and the scope, just as this body requested 6 months ago. We clearly do need the fields. This addresses that. This goes at core functionality. It's 4 fields, and we sorely need those 4 fields. It's 4 fields plus lights, because if you think about living in New England, you really do need lights to get the full benefit out of the fields. This is a very good proposal. The bids came in lower than we expected. That was much to our surprise and pleasure. And quite frankly, I believe the Board of Selectmen has done its due diligence and has responded to the requests of this body. And I would really request that you give hard consideration to supporting this. This is a really, really good proposal. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mr. O'Neill. Ms. Ryan?
Martha Ryan, Precinct 3, and through you, Mr. Moderator. I do stand in support of the Fields project, and I appreciate the hard work that has been put in to trying to limit the cost to the fields. But as a nurse and a caregiver to elderly parents and in-laws, and a mother of 3 grown children who have played multiple sports in Walpole, I have attended hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of games. But as someone who has tried to get my mother, God rest her soul, with Parkinson's out of a wheelchair into a porta potty at Byrd Middle School during a 9-inning baseball game, it's nearly impossible. To not have ADA bathrooms in the new Fields project is a miss, and I believe is wrong. I don't think we should have to fundraise for a bathroom that's accessible to all, but I stand in support of this Fields project, and I encourage you to all to vote yes. However, if through different appropriations or how the money is adjusted, I understand the scope of the project right now, but I can't let the opportunity go by to not say that it should in fact have bathroom facilities that are accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Ms. Young?
Hi, thank you. Melissa Young, Precinct 6. I don't necessarily have a question, but I would like to point out a fact a previous speaker has spoken to. I reached out to multiple people by Facebook, by email, and personally have received resounding no from the town. We keep talking about this critical need that the town has. We're talking about approximately 2,700 athletes in the town, my own children being some of them. I have 2 children that play multiple sports in this town, versus the 25,000-ish population. So we're asking for the entire town to receive a tax burden for less than 10% of the population. I don't find this to be a critical need. I'm finding that we have multiple other critical needs in this town. Again, coming from somebody that has children that play sports, and myself play sports. I heard overwhelming response today that from parents of children in the arts, in technology fields, in other fields, that feel that carrying a burden for the sports playing members of this town is not a necessity that this town needs right now. And I would seriously call to my fellow RTMs to think about this when we're talking about a critical need for sports fields, when, again, calling to the safety concerns as a secondary. Right now, this town and the whole state is calling to a vaping crisis for a small percentage of people, adults, that are choosing to vape, causing cancer and causing problems. And what we're trying to do is throw our children into a situation where we don't know the answer. And I think it's irresponsible of us as a town to do that. And I, again, maintain my no vote, and I urge all my RTMs to consider this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Ms. Lawson? Excuse me, folks, you have to be in queue, in line, if you wanted to come in and call the vote. Ms. Lawson?
Lawson, Precinct 2, move the question.
There you have it. Do I have a second? Ms. Karan, thank you. Yes, it is, Karen, yep. Move the question requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Sorry, the ayes carry it. 2/3 vote. Because I can tell that just a handful of people yelled no really loud. Okay? 2/3 vote. The question has moved. We will now entertain the vote on the article itself. All those in favor, this requires, because it has a borrowing, this requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Electronic vote, please. Get your devices ready. Let me just remind them. So press 1 for yes, 2 for no, or 3 to abstain. Voting is now open. The motion has passed. Article 4. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $616,000, and in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 20, the the sum of $250,575 from the appropriation from the Elm Street School roof, voted under Article 19 of the Fall 2018 Annual Town Meeting, which project is complete and no liability remains, to implement a capital improvement program to protect, improve, and/or modify the physical infrastructure of the town of Walpole, including but not limited to municipal buildings, facilities, parking lots, fields, and other properties, as listed in the Fall 2019 capital budget for Article 4, under the column entitled FinCom Recom, and further, that the Board of Selectmen is authorized to take any other action necessary or convenient to carry out these projects. Mr. Trudell, Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 15-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill, Board of Selectmen.
The Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Forsberg, Capital Budget.
Capital Budget voted favorable action 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 4? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 5, Capital Equipment Purchase. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to appropriate the total sum of $2,113,905 from ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation, cable funds, overlay, and free cash for the purchase and equipping of capital equipment, including but not limited to vehicles, machinery, and computer/network systems for the various departments of the town of Walpole, all as more specifically set forth in the Fall 2019 capital budget for Article 5 under the columns entitled FinCom Recon, and further, that the Board of Selectmen is authorized to take any other action necessary or convenient to carry out these projects. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, Finance Committee.
Finance Committee voted favorable action 15-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill, Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Forsberg.
Capital Budget voted favorable action 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Mr. O'Leary.
Point of order. On the previous article, that did not get a two-thirds vote. Do the math. It does not meet the two-thirds vote.
Doesn't require a two-thirds vote, Mr. O'Leary.
It's a borrowing. It had
Mr.
required a
O'Leary, it
two-thirds
doesn't
vote.
require a two-thirds vote.
Any borrowing article requires a two-thirds vote.
Where's the borrowing in Article 4?
$3 million? No, I'm sorry, Article 3. My mistake. I didn't make it myself clear.
Article 3 had a two-thirds vote.
No, they did not.
Yes, it did.
No, it did not. Do the math.
Mr.
Did
O'Leary,
not
your
meet-
point of order, the math is done.
$137. 137 voters, 91.
136 to the extension.
Abstention is still a voter.
Mr. Moderator, if I may, in accordance with state law, an abstention does not count towards a vote result. So in this case, it was 45 no and 91 yes. If you double the 45, you come up with 90. So it was more than a two-thirds vote.
Thank you.
you, Town Council. Mr. O'Leary.
I'm here to speak on my substitute motion for Article 5.
So Mr. O'Leary has a motion. Mr. O'Leary, I'm going to kind of summarize this. It's a little difficult to follow, but we get the gist of what you meant. Mr. O'Leary wants to remove the item of $400,000 from the total amount, which is to strike the Walpole High infrastructure assessment and associated work, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Okay. So we have Mr. O'Leary. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
John O'Leary, RTM Precinct 3. My reason for reducing this is twofold. One, if this is in fact a capital budget item, the 400,000 doesn't fit the description of what a capital budget item really is. Secondly, since this is for the schools, it really should be coming out of the school budget and not the town of Walpole's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Any other questions or comments on, yes, Dr. Goff?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. It's essential to clarify for everybody that currently the school committee and school department are asking for the consideration of potentially 2 school building projects, one for the middle schools and the other for Walpole High School. The middle school project will be completed with significant help from the state. We are currently in the eligibility period and have submitted the required documentation to the Massachusetts School Building Authority ahead of schedule. We will be notified in the coming weeks regarding an invitation to the feasibility study. This study will examine potential solutions to identified issues and will develop the most educationally appropriate and cost-effective solution for MSBA consideration. This evening, we request funding to complete a similar but smaller building study at Walpole High School. In your packet, there is a description of this building study. We have identified multiple areas of concern, and we need to get some potential solutions, along with cost estimates from an architect or building design team. The study will do just that. It is a plan that ensures Walpole Public Schools remains competitive in the educational landscape. This is the request before you in Article 5. If approved, we estimate that the work will take approximately 6 months, at which point we will be able to evaluate the options from both an educational and financial perspective. In the case of the Walpole High School project, we anticipate to fund it locally with the use of the debt budget and local funds. Currently, with almost 1,100 students, the high school's crowded. The 1908 building, which had renovations in 1932, 1960, 1970, and 2001, requires spaces flexible to accommodate an increasingly diverse student population to meet the academic, physical, social, and emotional needs of our students. This is not a nice to have. This is what the future of our children should have. We need improved technology and science spaces. We need room for our growing music program and space for our physical education and health classes. We need counseling spaces that reflect the growing social and emotional needs of our students and appropriate spaces to meet the needs of today's special education programs and our English learner programs. When undertaking a school building project of this sort, the Inspector General's office provides guidance to local communities, which we are following closely. During the 6-month process, the information will be shared publicly with the school committee, school administration, permanent building committee, finance committee, and other relevant local boards and departments. The final decision will be made by this body at a future town meeting. The information provided in the proposed study will be essential to the evaluation of these options. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments with Mr. Morawski? I'll wait to get to the mic before you start, Joe.
It doesn't make any difference. 4 minutes is not much. What Dr. Goff said triggered me. She says that we're going to make the final decision. So I need to know now, what is our debt capacity? Are we going to do a debt exclusion override for whatever findings? What's the vision for beyond the $400,000? This, it looks like Chapter 44, Section 10, which describes the debt limit, that we're allowed to borrow as much as 5% of equalized valuation, which is a total tax base in Walpole, full of fair cash value of all property, and we can't go over the 5%. But if I recall correctly, I didn't see Dennis Fliss in the room, our full evaluation is somewhere around $4 or $5 million. That means we could borrow up to $250,000 without a debt exclusion override. Is that true, or do I need further clarification?
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, we could actually borrow, I believe, last figure I checked, 236 million, is that correct? Okay. So 236 million within our levy capacity. We're nowhere near there. I ran some numbers because I thought this question might come up. So what's the big plan? What's the vision? The vision is to try to address the needs of this high school if the Board of Selectmen and school committees wish to do so within the levy capacity. In a few years, we're going to have, in 2025, we're going to have a debt ability to borrow about $713,000. The next year, it goes up to $1.6 million, $2 million a year after that. So we have items falling off the books, borrowing capacity items. So at $10 million, a high school will cost over 20 years about $768,000, an extension or a renovation here or whatever. So do we have the ability to address the needs of this school, $20 or $30 million? Potentially.
So that would, so that would be without a debt exclusion override. So what we're talking about when we hit the middle schools, which is state participation, we're going to have to go out to the voters on that. And that number has yet to be determined. So it could be a combination of the two schools, as what I understand. It could be Byrd and Johnson. So that amount could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars itself. I'm just worried about the impact of all of this. You know, it seems like we've found some type of loophole that we can use, and I'm getting kind of scared that this loophole is kind of risky in terms of asking the taxpayer to do a debt exclusion override and then also paying for a second school. I wish we had more of the debt capacity. I wish Dennis was here to fully explain the evaluation as it goes, because I assume that the evaluation could actually go higher with all the buildings that are being built in town. So the debt capacity under this Chapter 44 could actually keep on increasing at the 5% level. So that to me is kind of scary. I don't maybe mind doing a $400,000, even that's a lot of money.
30 seconds, Mr. Moraski.
But I'm going to tell you, when we come back here, we better have a detailed presentation of where we're going with this, because this could send a lot of people's tax bills sky high.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Mr. Pila.
Richard Pila, Precinct 7. Article 5, question, Mr. Moderator. What precipitated the need to conduct this study? Was it observations from the faculty? Were there certain guidelines by the state building authority? And the follow-up question to that is this for academic facilities, athletic facilities, other facilities within the high school complex?
Thank you, Mr. Buckley.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. Buckley, Precinct 7, Chairman of the Walpole School Committee. To the question raised by my friend and colleague from Precinct 7, last town meeting we stood before you and requested funds to examine the needs of secondary schools in Walpole, the middle schools and the high school. The funds that this body wisely appropriated, the $1.5 million, were appropriated with language that required that appropriation to be used for an MSBA project. And because the high school was not accepted into the MSBA, that $1.5 million cannot be utilized towards a high school study. However, the school committee has made a commitment to the community and spoke before this body just last session to examine the structural needs and come up with a comprehensive plan to do so. And so this second request is in keeping with the promise we made to the community and the desire of the committee to examine all of the needs at the secondary level. To answer your second question, this will be overarching. I think there's been some discussion out there that this is $400,000 for a gym. It is $400,000 to study lab space, to study congestion in hallways, to look at the needs for collaborative space for 20th century learning that was not necessary even 20 years ago when I was a student here during the last renovation. And the product of this $400,000 investment will be a roadmap to address those concerns. And to the point made from the gentleman from Precinct 8 a moment ago, that will then have to come back here with a very extensive and exhaustive presentation, not only to this body, but will also be the subject of public hearings and debate through the school committee, finance committee, and other processes along the way.
For you, Mr. Moderator. So this analysis, when it's done, it will say that educational standards in the Commonwealth indicate that so many square feet of space should be for science labs, so much should be for collaboration space. Is that what you're looking to find out and compare that or determine what we have and what is actually needed, recommended?
Mrs. Gallagher.
I think what we will get even more so than that, Richard, is different options to solve the problems that we have addressed already. Yes, it'll be a professional who may bring something else to the table that we haven't considered, but we pretty much know what we're concerned about because of what we've heard from the faculty and the administration. But what a professional architect or design team does is they'll come to us with 3 or 4, maybe even more options that can address our educational needs, and then we can evaluate them financially.
If after that analysis it's determined that the high school needs to be increased by, say, 20% of its space, if the high school doesn't qualify for state reimbursement, does that mean that the cost of adding the 20% to the physical plant will be the sole responsibility of the taxpayers?
Through you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Buckley?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Moderator. That's correct. The high school SOI was not accepted, and Walpole is left to do that. It's important to note that when a community files a statement of interest to the school building authority, which is a tremendous organization that everyone in this room pays a penny on the sales tax towards, those statements of interest compete against statements of interest across our entire Commonwealth. So by not being invited in, it doesn't mean that the need goes away. And so that was the impetus for this article, to continue to seek ways to address that need. But you're correct that the town will seek to do so on our own.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pila. Thank you, Mr. Buckley and Ms. Gallivan. Any further questions or comments with regard to Article 5? The substitute motion, on Article 5. Yes, it was, by Robert O'Leary. There being no further questions or comments on the substitute motion, we will now take a vote on the article, the substitute motion, which is to remove the $400,000 from the total for the Walpole High infrastructure assessment and associated work. All those in favor of the substitute motion becoming the main motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The noes have it. I declare a vote. We are now on to the original motion. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a vote. Article 6, it is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to appropriate a sum of $1,019,666 to resurface, repair, and/or reconstruct certain streets, parking lots, paved areas, and/or sidewalks, to make drainage improvements in certain town roads, and to rebuild certain manholes and catch basins in the town of Walpole, and to meet this appropriation to transfer the sum of $779,166 from Chapter 90 funds and $240,500 from free cash. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted 15-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill?
The Board of Selectmen voted favorable action, 5-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Forsberg?
Capital Budget voted favorable action, 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Any questions or comments? Mr. Fasanello?
Patrick Fasanello, Precinct 3. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I have just a question for whomever can answer it. In Article 6, and it also applies to Article 7, if I may, why can't I&I funds be used for part of this payment?
Mr. Johnson?
It's not part of the inflow and infiltration of the program.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, we've been told that especially manholes are a big part of some of the infiltration. That's why I'm curious why some of the money isn't being used. I can't hear you speak.
Yeah, it's not picking up.
It's not tied into the sewer system, Pat, so that's the reason we can't use the I&I funds. But next time stormwater comes up, I'll be sure to come to the sewer and water commissioners and ask to use some retained earnings.
So these are strictly, through you, Mr. Moderator.
Yep.
These are strictly drainage and not anything to do with sanitary sewer?
Mr. Johnson?
Strictly drainage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fasanello. Any further questions or comments with respect to Article 6? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It is a unanimous vote. Article 7, appropriation and borrowing authorization for road improvements. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $400,000 for improvements to various streets within the town, yada, 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 yada. That's legalese for the moderator, town council. Apologies. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted 15-0-0 favorable action.
Mr. O'Neill.
The Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Forsberg.
Capital Budget voted favorable action, 7-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Forsberg. Any questions or comments with regards to Article 7? Mr. Chekarowski.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Philip Shaharofsky, Precinct 7. Through you, Mr. Moderator, I just have a question in regard to whether any of these funds can be used for the sidewalk walk lights that that the town has been putting up.
Mr. Johnson?
The fund specifically in this article is going to be used on the roads designated under the handout in the back. So potentially next time around, we could talk about some lights and everything.
they're really working, and would just like to encourage, just to put in a plug for continuing to install lights, particularly at critical crosswalks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chekorowski. Any other further comments or questions with regards to Article 7? There being none, as this has borrowing, requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I declare a 2/3 unanimous vote. Article 8, this was in the consent agenda held by Mr. Pia. Regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $300,000 for the purpose of supplementing the stabilization fund as authorized by Chapter 40, Section 5B of the Mass General Laws. Mr. Pia? Mr. Pia is fine with us moving forward on this. There are no other questions or comments. This requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? I declare a majority vote unanimous. Sorry, quickly. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote?
Sorry. Finance Committee voted favorable action 15-0-0.
Thank you. Mr. O'Neill?
Board of Selectmen voted favorable action 4-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Article 9, appropriation to the OPEB. This was also held by Mr. Pia. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $292,000 for the purpose of supplementing the fund known as the Other Post-Employment Benefits Liability Trust Fund, OPEB, as authorized by Chapter 32B, Section 20 of the Mass General Laws. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen and Mr. Trudell. Finance Committee?
Finance Committee voted favorable action 15-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill?
And the Board of Selectmen favorable action 4-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Pia?
Richard Peeler, Precinct 7. At the Springtown meeting, a former member of this body came up with what I thought was an excellent idea, and I kind of yelled out at that particular time. And that was the revenues that are, tax revenues that are generated from the hotels that have recently been built, that the revenues go towards, 100% of those revenues go towards OPED. Last week I requested from Town Administrator Jim Johnson, what is the total obligation, outstanding amount for the unfunded pension liability? And it's 40, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, you said $42 million. You also provided, to you, Mr. Moderator, the administrator also indicated that what is in that account is about $4.2 million. So there's quite a shortfall. And the reason why I asked to put a hold on this is because I wanted to speak to this particular issue. Just recently, just the other day, there was an article in the business section of the Boston Globe, and it talked about, and it gave instances of situations around the country where people who had worked hard, saved their money, invested into this pension fund. Some of those funds became insolvent, and many of the people who thought that they were going to have a pension to live out through the rest of their lives found themselves with anywhere from a reduction of 50% to almost 100%. Not that long ago, not that far from here in the city of Central Falls, Rhode Island, the fire department, that town became insolvent. It was in bankruptcy, and all of the municipal employees had to take a cut of 50%. Now, it's not that that was a lot of money to begin with, but to have it reduced. I wouldn't want, I'm not in that situation, but I certainly would not want someone who worked hard for, in this case, the town of Walpole for many years, find themselves in a position that when they think that they're going to have that payment, because one never knows. None of us have a crystal ball. Anything could happen. And I would hate to have those pensioners find out one day that they're not getting that money. And so I think that this is newfound money.
Excuse me. Mr. Peely, would you mind just summing quickly the OPEB and how the pension and your comments relate?
Well, the OPEB has to do with the unfunded pension liability. It does not.
It doesn't. Mr. Johnson?
Just to clarify, and I think I know where Mr. Pila is going with this, it's the other post-employment benefits. And right now, I believe, I was trying to clarify with the finance team, I remember when Mr. Snuffer stood up and specifically said, we should take all the money in hotels tax and put it towards OPEB. In fact, we're almost doubling it this year. We budgeted about $400,000 or $450,000 in local receipts this year for the hotels tax, money we take in. With the town meeting action in the spring, we put aside $500,000. And with this action under this article, we're taking we're taking $292,000 for a total of $792. So we're going in that direction, and I think the Finance Committee made a concerted effort, along with the Selectmen and the School Committee last October, of trying to address the liability within the next 20 or so years. And I don't know as that many towns in the state that have kind of taken that step to accept a plan that can be changed going forward. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, because other towns, this is what they do, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the most prudent and responsible thing for the town of Walpole to do. But if we do have $42 million that is out there, that's owed, how will the people who are expecting that money to be paid to them, how are they going to know that they're actually going to get it? Because that was the bargain that they made when they became employees and contracted with the town of Walpole.
Just to clarify, Mr. Moderator, it's not the pension, it's the health insurance.
That was the point of order. It's not the pension. Other employment benefits, so it's health insurance and other associated costs that are offered to the pensioners.
To you, Mr. Moderator, when I asked the question in my email, what is the unfunded pension liability? That's what I'm referring to. Excuse me.
It's not. This is completely.
I'm sorry, but you specifically asked about OPEB. I provided you with a copy of the OPEB report that said there was a $42 million liability.
Correct. So my question is over how long a period of time is it going to be able to make sure that that money is there?
Okay, Mr. Flowers, Finance Committee.
So Mr. Pia is I think onto something important here. Let's just clarify some confusion.
All right.
OPEB is the health insurance, dental insurance of retirees, and pension is through Norfolk County usually. It's a totally different system. So the $42 million liability is the employees' health insurance, dental insurance, and it's an actuarial liability in perpetuity going out forward, right? And so, but just to get at your point of like, are we going to meet this obligation like other Massachusetts towns that have fallen behind? I think we're doing really good. This is to Town Administrator Jim Johnson's point where he said, you know, if you looked at Cliff Snuffer's suggestion of the hotel tax, it's only $450. Well, we're doing almost $800 this year. Now, where should we go? Now, this is just me speaking not as a town employee, and Marilyn and Jody and Tom and Jim may have different opinions, but speaking with the OPEB actuarial consultants and looking at how much we pay per year in terms of pay-go out of the budget for OPEB, it's about $2 million. Well, we should be paying about $3.3 million total. So we need to close that gap of roughly $1 million. And so we're getting close. We're at $792. Me personally, as just an RTM, I'd like to see $1 million at some point in the next few years. If we're paying $1 million into OPEB per year, and we did $500,000 in the spring, we're doing $292 today. So we're getting there. And again, in terms of the deadline, it's an actuarial liability. It's not going to happen. There's no, it doesn't have to happen overnight. It doesn't even have to happen over a decade. But as long as we're making progress, in my mind, this is my opinion, towards that 1 million number over the next few decades, we're in good shape.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Beeler. Any further questions or comments? If there being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I declare a unanimous vote. Article 11, this was also a consent agenda and was held by Mary LaRosa, I believe, or pulled by Mary LaRosa. This is an appropriation of funds to assist the Board of Assessors. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to transfer from overlay funds the sum of $50,000 for technical services of a consultant, appraisal firm, and/or hiring temporary personnel, along with expenses, to assist the Board of Assessors in meeting the certification standards by the Department of Revenue for the valuation of business personal property. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, Finance Committee.
Finance Committee voted for favorable action 1401.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill.
And the Board of Selectmen, favorable action 400.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Ms. LaRosa.
LaRosa, Precinct 8. Through you, Mr. Moderator, just a question. I'm just wondering how many of the business need to be reassessed this year, because I'm assuming they didn't all start the same year for operations. So,
Mr. Fisher, you out there? There he is, looking in the corner.
Evening, Jack Fisher, Board of Assessors. The question was how many businesses?
yes, sir. How many businesses do need to be reassessed this year?
Okay. As it turns out with personal property, what we do is we look at all of the businesses that have personal property, and the state requires us to go out and physically verify the personal property on a 5-year basis, and this is the 5th year to do it. To give you some numbers, there's 833 personal property business accounts and 260 which are taxable, but we have to go out and visit all 833.
So are you assessing them just every 5 years, no matter when the business opened? Or are you assessing them from when the business was opened? Like if I opened a business today in Walpole, I would be assessed 5 years from now? Or am I, if the assessment was going to happen in next year, I'd be assessed then? How does that work?
You're assessed every year.
Oh, I thought it said 5 years.
No, what it is the state requires us to go out and physically verify what the personal property is on a 5-year basis.
Okay. Okay. And
What we do is businesses are required to submit to us what they call a form of list, which is an inventory of taxable property. And what we do is we try to verify that as best as we can on a yearly basis. But businesses come in and go out. They go out of business, they move, whatever the case may be. So what we need to do is the state requires us to go out every 5 years and physically verify it. And it's a very specialized thing because we're doing inventory for fabric shops and construction equipment and cash registers and computers and so forth like that. So to get the actual fair market value for that stuff, it requires special information and people that know how to do it.
so you really just need this extra person every 5 years. There's not really a need for you to hire someone to help out through these years.
We actually had a good conversation with the FinCom about that. This is a 5-year cycle. And so what happens is we bring someone in every 5 years to do this. The yearly updates, we do that as part of our budget, our line item budget.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaRosa. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Any further questions or comments with regard to Article 11? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. It is a unanimous vote. I declare. Article 12, the Darwin Lane land purchase. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town take no action on Article 12. This is a petition of the Sewer and Water Commissioners. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted no action, 15-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill.
And likewise, the Board of Selectmen voted no action, 4-1-0.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. And Mr. Abbott, Sewer and Water.
Bill Abbott, Sewer and Water Chairman. The Sewer and Water Commission was interested in this site. However, we were not able to come to an agreement with the owner on a price, and there was a significant difference between what we wanted to pay and what they wished to sell for. We did take a vote, and the vote was 1 in favor of this article and 3 opposed. In a sense, we knew that we were not going to be able to purchase this based on the differences in price.
So unfavorable, 1-3-0.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 12? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. It is a unanimous vote. I declare. I got to remember that. Article 13, the MWRA grant loan authorization. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to appropriate the sum of $362,000 to pay costs of repairing and or rehabilitating various sewer lines, as well as removing infiltration and inflow, including all incidental and related costs. That to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the selectmen, is authorized to borrow $362,000 under Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Sections 7 and 8, and the rest of it is pretty much boilerplate language, which I'll let you peruse yourself, but it associates with borrowing. This is a petition of the Sewer and Water Commissioners. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
Finance Committee voted favorable action, 12-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill.
Favorable action, 4-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Mr. Abbott, Sewer and Water.
5-0-0 in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Favorable, right? Thank you, sir. Mr. Forsberg, did capital budget vote on this? Okay. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 13? There being none, this motion requires a 2/3 vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? It is a unanimous vote. I declare 2/3. Article 17, disabled, this is the Board of Assessors request to accept exemption language for disabled veteran. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to accept the sentence set forth in Massachusetts General Laws, Section 59, Section 5, after Clause 22nd F, initially added by Section 110 of the Acts of 1993, and as later amended, which section provides that the exemptions available under General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5, Clauses 22nd and 22nd A through F may be granted to otherwise eligible persons who have resided in the Commonwealth for 1 year prior to the date of filing for exemptions pursuant to the applicable clause. This is a petition of the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Trudell, Finance Committee vote?
14-0-1.
14-0-1. Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill?
5-0-0, favorable action.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Are there any questions or comments with regards to Article 17? There being none, this motion requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? It is a unanimous vote, I declare. Article 19, this is a citizen's petition for language replacement. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to file home rule legislation to amend the town charter to 1, replace the term Board of Selectmen, Board of Selectmen, Board or Selectmen, appearing in context where reference is made to the entire board, with the term Select Board. 2, replace any reference to individual members of the board with Select Board Member. 3, to insert a new sentence providing that the Select Board shall have all of the powers and duties of a Board of Selectmen as provided in the general laws or in the Charter, except as otherwise provided in the Charter, and indicating that members may be referred to as board members or select board members or other similar moniker. And 4, to replace any reference to a chairman with the word chair, and further to authorize the general court to make changes of form only to such bill unless the Board of Selectmen authorize changes that shall be within the scope of the public purposes of the petition, and to authorize the board to approve such changes. This is a citizen's petition. Mr. Trudell, the Finance Committee vote.
After long debate and several votes, we came to favorable action 15-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill.
The Select Board voted favorable action 3-2.
Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. Any questions or comments with regard to Article 19? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Oh, hold on. Out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking down the center. I'm in a zone. Ms. Khatib.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sarah Khatib, Precinct 8. I'm tired, so I'm going to try to go quickly, and hopefully things will go well. So there was a handout in the back. Hopefully you all got it with the modified language of Article 19 and 20. We've submitted 2 citizens' petitions this fall town meeting to update Walpole to gender-inclusive language for the only male-gendered board, that is the Board of Selectmen, as well as the title of chairman across all boards, towns, and committees. We propose to change the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board and chairman to chair. Now, we know that male-gendered names have not prevented Okay. Not allowed. Should I continue?
Yes, I'm sorry. Was it me that was confusing?
The
mic. I thought so. I didn't think it was me. Yeah, just try just stepping back just a speck.
So we know that male-gendered names have not prevented non-males from serving, but this change is proposed to better reflect our reality of gender diversity. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the work of what I'll call citizen journalist and former prominent figure in Walpole, Sam Olson. Sam maintained a blog on Walpole politics for a while, and at one point he wrote a post on Walpole Board of Selectmen members, and the data that I'm about to read is credited to him. Colonial Massachusetts towns here. Okay. Hello? Okay. So Walpole, like other Massachusetts towns, created a board of executives to conduct the town business between town meetings. And that was the Board of Selectmen. When Walpole was founded in 1724, the town selected 3 men to conduct the business, and that formed the first Board of Selectmen. So in Walpole, from its founding, from 1724 until 1953, that's a span of 229 years, no women served on the board. In the decades of the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, so each of those decades, 1 woman served on the board. In the decades of the 80s and the 90s, each of those decades, 2 women served. In the decade of the 2000s, and this was the first time that 2 women served on the board at the same time, Walpole saw its most women ever, and that was 3 women in the decade. Our current decade, 2010, so far we've had 2 women serve. So in my remarks to the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, as well as in the article that I wrote for the organization Future of Walpole, I referenced studies on gender inclusion. And the reason I did that is because those studies reflected my actual experience. The first time that I really considered the term Board of Selectmen was probably sometime after I moved to Walpole. So I was a grown adult with 4 children. And when I did consider the board, I wondered if someone like me, a woman, belonged there or would be welcome. So I also wondered whether I would like to refer to myself as a man. Honestly, no, I do not. But on the first question, I've been involved with the town for a few years now, and I know more about how the town operates, and I see how Board of Selectmen members treat each other with respect, and I can confidently say that someone like me, a non-male, does absolutely belong on the board and would be welcome. But words do matter. It's just not acceptable that we have a male-gendered name for our highest elected board. We're proposing this simple change to our bylaws and our town charter to encourage future leaders to serve and to better reflect our current composition. Many cities and towns across Massachusetts have made this change. All 56 Massachusetts cities have made the change, and to date, according to my research, 97 Massachusetts towns have moved to gender-inclusive language. The town administrator estimates that the change can be implemented with a cost of less than $10,000. This is money well spent for the benefit of our future. Our proposal is this: let us do everything we can to encourage all of our citizens to seek to be leaders of this town. I ask for your support in Articles 19 and 20. Thank you.
Further questions or comments with regards to Article 19? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. Oh. Mr. Hamilton.
Hamilton, Precinct 5. I knew Sam Elbar. Sam Elbar was a friend of mine. But he was a very straight-laced guy, and he left out some of the best titles that I don't see up there, but I'll still support this.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Any further questions or comments? Are you sure? Mr. O'Leary. It does not, Town Council.
Mr. Moderator, because the town would be seeking special legislation to amend the town charter, it's just a majority vote, as is all special legislation requests.
Excellent question, Mr. O'Leary. I asked it myself earlier today. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Kelly, come down to the microphone, please.
I'm sorry, but I just feel like this is a waste of $10,000. I mean, even in women, there's a woman. So, I mean, I think $10,000 could be better spent. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any further questions or comments? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. It is a majority vote. I declare. I kind of like that. I declare. Article 20, this is another citizen's petition that Ms. Khatib just spoke to. It is regularly moved and seconded that the town vote to amend the general bylaws by replacing, in each instance in which they appear, the words Board of Selectmen, Board of Selectmen, Board or Selectmen, when such terms reference the entire board, with the term Select Board, the term Select Man, with select board member, and 3, the term chairman and the term chair, provided, however, that this bylaw amendment shall take effect only after all the provisions of General Law, Chapter 40, Section 32 have been met, and the special act approved under Article 19 takes effect. This is a citizen's petition. Mr. Trudell, Finance Committee.
Favorable action 15-0-0.
Thank you, Mr. Trudell. Mr. O'Neill.
Select Board voted 3-2 favorable action.
Thank you, Chair O'Neill. Any other questions or comments with respect to Article 20? There being none, this requires a simple majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I declare a majority vote. Hey, folks, one night. Now, one other thing, hey, before you leave, please, two things. Hey, folks, hold on. You must return your voting device up in the back in the bucket. If you do not, you will be charged. I understand. Okay. Thank you. Who made the motion? Motion to dissolve, not adjourn. Mr. Trudell, seconded. Mr. Lynch, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Good night, folks.